Hello everyone, Nathan P. Butler here. In the recent past, we took a look at all the content from the first Kickstarter for the game Sorcerer. And I mentioned at the time it's basically my favorite competitive sort of one-on-one, most of the time, card game out there. I love the fact that it is basically asymmetrical decks, but they are built in a way that doesn't require a lot of construction ahead of time, and yet at the same time, it's not really a deck building game or anything like that where you're building your decks during the game. You do construct them at the beginning, but you do so using three specific sets of components to make it very easy to sort of get different themes for the characters, different play styles, and very easily jump into the game when you want to play it. And the reason why I did the video when I did was because we finally got word that the second Kickstarter's content was finally on the way. You notice I said finally twice there? It probably bears repeating several more times. This is a game that actually finished funding in July 2020. And they knew going into it there were COVID issues and stuff going on. It's actually in the video where they suggest, hey, please pledge for the game, but if you can't, we thank you for your support anyway, and so forth. It was due to be delivered in July of 2021. It has finally now been delivered in May, for me at least, 2024. So basically it took enough time from when it funded to when it was actually delivered for someone to have entered and then graduated from high school. You might say, well, wait a second, it wasn't a full 4 years. Neither is graduating from high school. Remember, the summer of senior year doesn't count because you're already out of school. So it actually took a tiny bit more than someone going through high school or through getting their bachelor's in college to actually get this game onto our doorsteps. It is still being delivered to some folks in the US and in other regions like the EU that only just recently started fulfilling, but hopefully in the near future, everyone who backed this will have it in their hands. I was lucky to be around the midpoint, I guess, of the US delivery. So what we want to look at here is all the new content from the second Kickstarter, and it's the Kickstarter that actually adds solo and cooperative play into the mix for Sorcerer, which I'm very excited about because that is now the primary way I play most board games. This is actually what we're going to look at second, though, out of what we're looking at here within this video. This is Sorcerer Endbringer. This is the solo/cooperative game content for Sorcerer. But in that same Kickstarter, we got a whole bunch of other content that can be played in either mode. The new domain packs and lineage packs and character packs, some new battlefields and so forth. All are things that can be played with Endbringer for solo and co-op, or for the other standard modes that we talked about in the last video for PvP play. So we're actually going to focus in on those first, so that those who are interested in the PvP aspect of Sorcerer, which is the primary mode of play, can see all of that stuff first. And then we'll look at the stuff for solo and co-op so that those who are interested only in sort of that primary mode of the game can then jump away and not have to worry about figuring out where to jump in instead. So this second Kickstarter for Sorcerer, again, it ended in July 2020. They had a $50,000 goal for funding, and they actually raised, on Kickstarter itself, $424,430. So much more wildly successful than their initial goal, but we see that a lot with Kickstarters where the goals are set somewhat low. So in this video, we will look at Endbringer, we will look at all the new packs, we will look at the new battlefields, we'll see what stuff was stretch goals and how it all came together, basically just like we did last time for the first wave of Sorcerer content. Now, because this is from a Kickstarter, we do need to talk about pledge levels very quickly before we move on. This was a Kickstarter in which you could get literally everything for Sorcerer if you started with nothing. So all the Wave 1 content we looked at last time, plus all the new Wave 2 content we're going to look at this time. You could do a just looking tier, which will get you updates, but wouldn't even get you into the Pledge Manager for $1. If you wanted to get into the Pledge Manager after the campaign was over to get stuff then, you needed to pledge the Pledge Manager tier for $30. Then if you just wanted Endbringer, which basically meant you got Endbringer, which includes some new battlefields that they separated out when shipping and for retail, but were originally meant to be in here. So basically Endbringer, the new battlefields, and the 5 packs that were stretch goal related, that were unlocked for everyone, you could get the Endbringer only tier for $40. If you only wanted the new packs, but you didn't want Endbringer, because mainly you were going to be playing PvP, which is actually what we will be looking at first here, you could have gotten the Seth, House of Petro, Forsaken Church, and Sigismund packs, along with those 5 stretch goal packs in the packs only tier for $46. If you're a brand new player and you needed the core box and you wanted Endbringer, but really nothing else except the unlocked stretch goals, which you get those 5 extra packs, you could have gotten the new player tier at $69. Or if you already owned previous stuff and you just wanted the new stuff, you could do the aptly named new stuff tier for $75, which would include basically everything I just mentioned in that packs tier, along with Endbringer and the battlefields, because that was all the new stuff, except dividers, which were a separate add-on, as we will see. And if you wanted to get what they were calling everything, which is sort of maybe everything gameplay related, you could get the everything tier for $169. That is basically the 2 big boxes, all the extra battlefields, the 2 extra player boards, plus all of the packs for character, lineage, and domain from both campaigns. But no like extra dice, sleeves, dividers, anything like that. And what I thought was pretty cool was they also offered a Sorcerer Now tier. So if somebody wanted to jump into Sorcerer, but they wanted to get at least the stuff from that Wave 1 content immediately or pretty soon, rather than waiting for Endbringer itself to deliver, which probably would have been a great bet this time around given how long this thing took to fulfill, 3 years past the target, you could pay $1 more for $170 to get that Sorcerer Now tier. It's the same stuff in the everything tier, but everything that was from the first Kickstarter would ship early, and everything for the second Kickstarter would ship later. However, you would be paying shipping twice. But it's kind of like when Awakened Realms, for example, does split shipment options. I kind of like it. Didn't need it, but kind of like it. For what it's worth, they did offer regular add-ons, which would have been $50 for another copy of the base game, $40 for another copy of Endbringer, $5 for an extra player board. The Egyptian battlefields were $9. Sleeves, mentioned elsewhere in this video, $25 for a box of 300, $5 for a pack of 50. Extra dice, also mentioned elsewhere in the video here, $7 for an extra set of large dice, $6 for an extra set of regular dice. Then of the non-Kickstarter exclusive packs, the 2 non-exclusive character packs, Virgiliu and Seth, $6 each. The Lineage packs, Sylvani and House of Petro, $10 each. The Domain packs, which are Blood-Soaked Fjord and Forsaken Church, $5 each. A Dividers add-on, plastic dividers for $20, which we'll be looking at. And then for the Kickstarter exclusive packs, the paid ones this time around, which would have been any of the ones from the first Kickstarter, whether they were stretch goal or not, they were all now paid add-ons. And then from this one, just the ones that were designed as paid add-on Kickstarter exclusives. Because, the stretch goal ones you get for free. For this campaign, at least. The 2 lineages, the Children of Alesia from the first time around and Sword of Gabriel from this time, were $10 each. The characters, Jalessa, Ragnar, Thenok, Wachiwi, and Sigismund were offered also. Sigismund, though, was $10 because there are more cards with him. The others were all $6, at least as add-ons. And then for the domains, you had the Lunatic Asylum, the Royal Palace, Witch Mountain, and the Bewitched Woodland, all for $5 as add-ons. So various options, various goodies to get all the stuff you might want for Sorcerer. I'm still kind of hoping for a playmat someday, but probably getting my hopes up. But hey, at the pace they fulfill their Kickstarters, if they do another Kickstarter for Sorcerer in a few years, by the time it arrives, maybe with the playmat, I'll probably be retired by then. Plenty of time to play. But enough jokes, let's get into the products here. Now, before we dive into the brand new content, I did want to address one thing that I mentioned last time that I could not show you from the original Kickstarter content that eventually did also become available, say, through their website and in some cases through retail. And that was the extra large dice. Basically, you get the regular size dice in the regular game, and then you could purchase extra dice sets in either the regular size or an extra large size. The regular size we saw last time is just kind of the normal dice here. But now I finally have, thanks to this Kickstarter, those extra large, super chunky dice. So just like with the other ones, it is a set of 7. I cannot tell you the millimeters off the top of my head. I apologize for that. But notice here, pretty significant difference in size. It is 7, because the most you will ever roll at a time is 7. And I would note, by the way, that the energy die, that is the same size regardless of where you're getting it. So if you're looking for an upgrade to your battle dice to get something a little bit chunkier, with maybe a little more table presence, perhaps, if size is your thing for that kind of thing, they are available. The regular extra dice pack, at least in the Kickstarter for this round of content, The regular size dice were $6 for an extra pack, whereas the extra large dice were $7 for an extra pack. So the price difference is relatively minimal. I do also want to note one other thing before we really dive into the new content, but it is somewhat related to new content. You may recall that we previously looked at these Sorcerer sleeves in a nice box of 300 here. You get a box of 300 for $25 in this particular campaign, or a pack of 50 for $5. Now, as I flip them over to the other side here, they are theoretically the same sleeves, right? I mean, you're seeing the sleeves here side by side. I can't necessarily tell much difference, if any, between them, maybe the tiniest bit. But what I would say is that when you actually look at them up close, and I do not know if you'll be able to see this on camera. I think you kind of can. The ones that shipped with this second Kickstarter fulfillment are a little clearer, at least to my eyes, than the original sleeves from the first Kickstarter and that they made available to their website later. That's almost a little cloudier, which was actually one of the complaints that I had about the sleeves, that they were nice sleeves and kind of anti-glare, well, kind of for the most part, but just had kind of that almost foggy look to them. So if you are sleeving the stuff from the Endbringer wave, and you really don't necessarily need to, it's a nice finish on the cards, sturdy enough, but if you sleeve, if your eyesight is relatively keen, and mine really isn't, but I'm playing a game, reading a lot of cards, wearing my glasses and everything, you may notice during play differences if you sleeve the new stuff in new sleeves that you just bought and the old stuff in the original sleeves. I got lucky. I made a mistake and thought that I was going to need more of the official sleeves than I actually was going to, so I wound up buying 2 extra boxes of the 300 sleeves instead of 1, when I probably only really needed to get 1, only to realize when it arrived that that turned out to be a good thing, because I could re-sleeve all of my original stuff in the new round of sleeves, so they all actually do match, and just tuck all my foggy ones aside in case there's any need for them perhaps at some point in the future. So just know that even though they say they are the same sleeves, they would swear up and down, it's the same sleeves. Not really. Not in how they actually look when you start putting your cards in them. There's a slightly different sheen film, I don't even know what to call it, to the clear side of the sleeves this time around, which I actually prefer, because to me it's a little clearer, a little less foggy, but that does mean a slight mismatch for those who sleeve. Now, whether you are playing in the solo or cooperative mode, or one of the many competitive modes for this game, you're going to need battlefields. And we've seen already that there are 4 battlefields included in the base game. And then you can get that Egyptian set of battlefields, where not only were they just differently themed battlefields, but they included a special ability at each location. And the abilities, for the most part, varied. There wasn't really a theme to the abilities of the Egyptian ones. In this Kickstarter, they initially, all the way through the process, really until production and shipping, talked about there being this new set of battlefields, the coastal battlefields, included with Endbringer. But at some point they must have realized that it made more sense to separate these out to be able to sell them separately for PvP players in the future who maybe don't want Endbringer for solo or co-op. So when they finally did start delivering, everybody who backed Endbringer did get these, but they came in a separate package, as they will be sold in the future. My guess is for probably around $9, because that's how much the Egyptian ones were going for during this Kickstarter. But we have 3 new battlefields here. We have Coast, Coastal Town, and Lighthouse, and each one of them has a sort of similar themed ability. Each one has you exhaust a minion to gain something, either getting 4 energy, 3 omens, or drawing 4 cards. So kind of a theme here to this one, more so than the last time, and of course they have their destroyed side on the back. Or I guess I should call it the conquered side, officially. When you are playing solo or cooperative, you're expected to just play with these sides as the ones that are face up, because you do not need the tracks on the other side. But on the off chance that you want to actually use the abilities for locations, you can totally do them right side up or unconquered side up. You just would ignore the tracks that are on them. But it's kind of nice. We now have a grand total of 10 different potential battlefields to use within the game, providing a bit more variety of location effects, if you want them at all. Now, no matter what mode you're playing, you are going to need your Grimoire and your skill cards, that are to come from a combination of your 3 components for the player: your character, your lineage, and your domain. Again, as a refresher, your character is who you are. Your lineage is sort of where your magic school comes from, like what school of magic or school of sorcery you have been brought up in. And then you have your domain, which is essentially where your followers are, where your authority comes from. And in this case, what we initially had as a planned thing outside of stretch goals was a total of 3 of each regular and Kickstarter exclusive, so you can say retail and Kickstarter exclusive components. So we have the character of Seth as retail and the Kickstarter exclusive Sigismund. We have the regular House of Petro, the Kickstarter exclusive Sword of Gabriel, the regular Forsaken Church, and then the Kickstarter exclusive Bewitched Woodland. Again, as a refresher, your characters will have a skill card and 10 cards for your Grimoire. Your lineage will have a skill card and then have 20 cards for your Grimoire. And then the domain will have 10 cards for the Grimoire along with its skill card. So it's essentially 10, 20, 10. 25%, 50%, and 25% to make up your Grimoire and your skills available. Then we had 5 more packs, 3 characters and 2 domains that were stretch goals, or compiled through stretch goals. Multiple stretch goals together, once unlocked, creating a specific pack, just like last time. In this case, the characters are Tatsu, Merlin, and Nicodemus. Nicodemus is another instance where something wasn't completely unlocked during the campaign, but it was done through some backer activity immediately after the campaign ended to sort of finish out that unfinished pack. And then we have 2 domains that were unlocked by stretch goals. That is the Forlorn Opera House and the Bloodcursed Ship. And before we get into the decks, I would note that, of course, each of those character decks does come with a new little standee for your avatar for that character when they are on the battlefield. I've already mixed up all the bases, so I figured I'd just leave the bases out of the picture and show you these actually in a way that probably looks better than last time, where you can see them a little better. But there's your 5 new characters with their little avatars. So Seth is our first character here, and he is actually one who would go to regular retail. He's not Kickstarter exclusive. In fact, he is the only new character that is not Kickstarter exclusive. And he basically is all about manipulating sin cards and a new concept called collateral damage. So Seth has his own little rule card. It's got lore on the back, which is kind of cool. They didn't just repeat it. They actually used it for something here. And the rules are specifically here for this new concept of collateral damage that he can do. So collateral damage, kind of a specific new type of damage, is assigned 1 point at a time by the defending player in the battlefield where it came from. They may assign each point of damage to one of their minions in that battlefield or to their side of the battlefield itself. It cannot be assigned to a side of a battlefield that has only 1 defense remaining, so it can't be the thing that conquers it. A battlefield cannot be conquered with collateral damage. So kind of like how weaken can't be the thing that kills a minion. Then he has his skill card, his action. Again, typically skill cards for characters are something that gives you a new action you can do during that phase of the game, along with your regular ones. So exhaust this skill card and shuffle all sin cards attached to it into your Grimoire to deal collateral damage, as described there, equal to that number of sin cards plus 1, then draw 2 cards. So pretty cool, pretty useful there. Question is, what are these sin cards and whatnot, and what else is in his deck? He really doesn't have much beyond the sin cards specifically for him, but of course he'll have other stuff within his lineage and domain, whichever ones he chooses. There's a symbol there, by the way. So he has a sorcery here, which is Sin Eater. He has 3 copies of this. Search your Grimoire, shuffle afterwards, of course, and or your graveyard for up to 2 sin cards, reveal them, and put them into your hand. So a way of getting sin cards back. So if they're attached and he does that action, then they just go right back into the Grimoire that way. But in this case, you can actually get them back into your hand if they're in the Grimoire or in the graveyard. So you can kind of manipulate that as you go. Again, there are 3 copies of this. It is one that gives you an omen. And then all the rest of his cards are sin cards based on the 7 deadly sins. So he really doesn't have any minions of his own. We have Gluttony, again, dealing with collateral damage there. Lust, weakening. Greed, gaining 1 energy. Wrath, another one dealing with collateral damage. Pride, dealing with healing. Sloth, letting you exhaust a non-legend minion. Envy, letting you steal an omen. But notice that with pretty much all of these, it says attach this sin to your character skill card. So once you use it, without any cost, right? There's no cost to play it up here. It's going to go underneath that character skill card until you use that action to then get that collateral damage and such from it. And they pretty much all then give you the ability to take an action for free when you play that card, with the exception of Sloth, which specifically says you do not take an action for free after playing this sin. Then we have our one retail new Lineage pack, which is the House of Petro. Typically these are a little bit more complex than the characters or domains. As we see here, we have not only a skill card and his regular 20 cards, where he has 3 copies here of Bokor's Brew, and 1 copy here of the legend minion Asefi the Witch Queen, 2 copies of everything else here. He also has, or someone playing this also has, a special rule card, a temple card, and 4 what are called Loa cards. So again, we have a special rule card here, in this case double-sided, because there's a lot of rules to this one compared to the one we just looked at there. And a skill card. And I guess I should note here, of course, the skill cards have that back, as they always have. This lineage makes you the Ritualist. So the ability here is ongoing, as we often see with lineages. The ongoing, whenever you play a House of Petro minion, that's the symbol down here in the corner, you may exhaust this skill card to sacrifice the top 2 cards of your Grimoire. Well, what does sacrifice mean? Well, you're going to have this out in front of you, this temple card. It is double-sided, but it's the same thing on both sides here. It says ongoing, whenever you sacrifice cards, attach them face down to this card. So they're kind of like a currency you're building up, because you're going to spend those spirits, so to speak, because you are going to start with a Loa, specifically Kalfu, mounted to you, essentially. And when the Loa is mounted to your character, you can use its abilities. But notice it says ongoing, you may spend temple cards as omens, but only to re-roll dice. There's an ability you'll be able to use when you have that Loa mounted to you, but typically it will spend sacrificed cards that are sitting there on your temple. So you'll use abilities to get rid of the cards to the temple, and then spend them to send them to the graveyard from there. I also got that slightly different, cool border design and everything here. It says Loa down at the bottom. And each round, at the end of the round, you will basically take away the one that had mounted you for that round and pick one of your other 3. So you're swapping them out. You just can't ever use the same one 2 rounds in a row. So we have Kalfu. These are also double-sided, by the way, but they are identical on either side. We have Simbi, with an action to spend a number of temple cards to heal that much total damage from any number of your minions. Papa Legba, an action, play a sorcery from a graveyard, that could be your opponent's, paying its cost with temple cards. The sorcerer's owner shuffles it into their grimoire instead of putting it back into their graveyard. So you can use it, that's cool, but they get it back, potentially drawing it later, though if it's you, no big deal, right? And then Baron Samedi, action, play a non-legend minion from a graveyard, paying its cost with temple cards. And yes, that could be someone else's minion that you are playing onto your side. The trick to that, though, and it is mentioned specifically on the second side of the rules, is that basically if you were to use that type of ability and get access to maybe, I don't know, a card that's a minion that has something to do with, say, blood, it gives us the example there. Well, there's only one lineage that actually uses the blood mechanism, so you wouldn't get that blood benefit. You don't suddenly get to use these different special features of a given, component of the deck. You're just getting that minion and using them, or sorcery, or whatever it might be. Then you have the regular 40-card deck here. We have, as I mentioned, Bokor's Brew, 3 copies of it. It does give you an omen. It is -3, though. So, yes, it is a curse. Toxin curse specifically here. So, kind of cool that the one attachment we get here is actually a curse that you can play on the other player's cards. So we have 1 curse there, ongoing, when the attached minion is destroyed, sacrifice this attachment instead of putting it into the graveyard. When played, weaken the attached minion. So you're not only doing that, but you're also weakening them as well. Again, 3 copies of that. Then you have 2 copies here of your minion Restless Aberrant. Ongoing, whenever a minion is destroyed, heal 1 damage from this minion. I'm not going to go through the abilities of all of them. You can see them on the screen there. But then we have another one that has that sacrifice ability, right? So that's key to using those Loa abilities. So we have Gwynee Reject, if I'm saying that correctly. 2 copies of that. We have Voodoo Doll, again with sacrifice, right? Draw 3 cards, gain 2 omens, then sacrifice this card. It's a sorcery, though. Then we have Bone Reading Divination. Another sorcery. Notice the bulk of these giving you omens as you play. You have the minion Mambo Osogwe. I apologize for the pronunciations. I am terrible. Mange Loa. Poor chicken. There is a joke there about choking. Never mind. I am not going to make it. I'm going to be better than that, damn it. Mambo Serpoint. Virulent Capata. And then that one that I mentioned before, that's our legend minion here that just has the one copy, Asefi, the Witch Queen. When played, you may sacrifice the top card of your Grimoire to activate any Loa's power. But Kalfu's ability is not a power. Remember, that's that one about being able to spend the temple cards as omens. That's not a power. Then we have one new retail domain, and that is the Forsaken Church. And it actually shares that collateral damage mechanism with Seth that we saw a little bit ago. Again, 10 cards for any of these, so 3 cards, 2 of each, 2 of each, 2 of each, and 1 down there for our legend minion. And let's take a look at them. Again, you got a rule card. It's just the collateral damage stuff on either side this time. Double-sided, same information. We have our skill card here with a tactic. Again, typically with a domain, it's going to be a tactic ability. You may exhaust this skill card to deal 1 collateral damage if the attacking minion is of this type, right, of the Forsaken Church type, which is actually based out of South Dakota. Then deal 1 additional collateral damage. Then again, 3 copies of Bone Man, so some collateral damage stuff there. Then 2 of Dread Charger. Interestingly, Dread Charger as a zombie here. Kind of a cool thing because there are some other zombies in the game. But notice, no actual ability, just fairly strong in terms of dice to roll and whatnot, kind of weak to defeat. But no actual special ability at all. Pardon the focusing there. Then we have Putrid Outlaw, more collateral damage. Then Bogey, another collateral damage, this time triggered when another minion is destroyed. And then that one there that is just by itself as its own card, no multiple copies, legend minion, Callahan the Preacher. Whenever you play another minion, deal 1 collateral damage as an ongoing ability. And notice there, no omens in this particular deck component with the exception of Callahan. Then we have our first of the Kickstarter exclusive characters. This was always Kickstarter exclusive. There is no stretch goal aspect to this one. This is Sigismund. I always get Sigismund and Seth's names backwards, but the Sigismund, kind of the face of Endbringer, was that image on the Kickstarter page for many, 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 many years. But here we have, of course, the skill card is going to have a separate rule card again. Yeah, 3 copies of 1 card, 2 of 2 cards, and then singles for the last 3 there. Plus 6 identical tokens and 3 special other kind of token-ish special cards just for him. So let's take a look at our second vampire-themed thing. Put this with Keepers of Progeny as your lineage and your vampires all day. So again, his own rule card here, dealing with fortifications and tokens, the same on both sides. And those play into his skill card, where his action here, there's his symbol there, kind of a bloody heart. His action, exhaust this skill card to choose 1. Put 2 Coven Newborn tokens into play, or put 1 Coven Fortification into play. What does that mean? Before we look at these, let's look at those. So a Coven Newborn, you got 6 copies of this one, is basically just a little low-level token minion. Notice just 1 attack and 1 essence here, so not very strong, pretty easy to kill, but this minion gets +1 attack for each of your other Coven Newborn tokens. But notice, it is an ongoing ability, but it's got that symbol there, so it is just in that one battlefield. So you have 6 of these. Either side is identical. They are limited, so once all 6 are out there, then you can't put any more out there at the time. But an interesting stacking ability for those, which you can use as skill card to put into play. Then you have 3 fortification cards, which in and of themselves are identical front and back again, but they are 3 different cards this time. And you can have 1 of these in any one given battlefield. 1 of this particular deck's fortifications, just in case they ever make any more, for example. So we have Underground Haven with the ongoing ability, your Coven Newborn tokens get +1 attack, so beefing them up a little bit more again. Breeding Chamber, ongoing, at the end of each round, put a Coven Newborn token into play. And then Hunting Grounds, whenever a minion is destroyed, restore 1 defense to your side of this battlefield. So 2 of them, again, dealing with those Newborn tokens, 1 that is more about healing the battlefield, which again is the way that you lose the game in competitive. This has a different effect that we'll see when we look at solo and cooperative, but it is still beneficial. So again, getting back to his regular Grimoire cards, we have 3 copies of Pure Blood Tracker, which again deals with the fortification. While you have a Coven fortification attached to this battlefield, this minion gets +2 attack. 3 of those, and there's an Omen attached to it. Dragonborn Duelist, another one. While you have a Coven fortification attached to this battlefield, this minion gets +2 attack. 2 of those. Dragon Knight, gain an Omen for each of your Coven Newborn tokens when played. So again, playing off those special cards for him, also Omens. Then we have a Legend minion here, Vampire, Lord Mary the Dragon, Mother of whatever. Ongoing ability, whenever you put a Coven Newborn token into play, you may return a card from your graveyard to your hand, which is pretty cool. Then non-legend, but only 1 copy, Wallachian, I'm assuming it's supposed to be pronounced with a W, right? Wallachian Bloodlord. When played, search your Grimoire, shuffle afterwards, and or your graveyard for a vampire minion specifically from this deck. Reveal it and put it into your hand. I love the fact that we're now getting to the point where there's enough of thematic crossover between different possible deck components like vampires that the fact that they're specifying the deck symbol does make a lot more sense now. I mean, it made sense before, but it certainly is needed now. It's getting more complex. You have Rite of the Dragon, also only 1 copy here, a spell, or excuse me, a sorcery they call it in this game, to put a Coven Newborn token into each battlefield. Nice if you got 3 that aren't already out there. Then if vampires are sort of like the demons, the evil ones out there, as if there's not a ton of other evil themes in this game, we have this Kickstarter exclusive Lineage, Sword of Gabriel, which introduces new tokens. Not new token cards, like we just saw, but actual, cardboard tokens here. This one is more thematically tied around the idea of angels and divine power. So again, we're getting a little more complex here because we're looking at a lineage. So we have a rule card, but still just repeating the same stuff on both sides. So 2 sections here. One thing you're dealing with are light counters. So put 1 on for 1, put 1 on for 2, and then swap those out for 1 marked with 3 if you happen to have 3. So light counters, whenever you're able to actually put them on something, will either go on your lineage skill card, which you're going to use to pay for some things that we'll see in just a moment, or you can just put them on a minion in the same battlefield your avatar is in, and you're essentially blessing that minion and giving them +1 attack and +1 essence. More on that other card type and that other use here in a second. Here is that skill card you may be placing those onto. The Thaumaturge. Ongoing. Whenever you meditate, you may exhaust any number of your skill cards to gain that many light counters. And we have our symbol down here. So let's look at his regular Grimoire cards before we look at the Divine cards that will actually use those as you play. So we have 3 copies here of the minion Host of Restoration. When played, you may discard up to 3 cards, gain a light counter for each card discarded this way, so getting more light counters. 3 copies also of Host of Retribution. When played, gain a light counter. See the theme here. Notice this one's actually flying and has the Omen symbol, whereas that previous one is flying with no Omen, so that is what that symbol means. Remember, that means that you can reinforce without having to necessarily go to the battlefield that's adjacent to you. You could go all the way to the other side, basically. At least in a 3 battlefield game, essentially it means like free movement for reinforce. And then we have Zealous Martyr. When played, you may weaken this minion twice to gain a light counter. So again, light counter and Omen here. Another minion, Host of Revelation. When played, search your Grimoire, shuffle afterwards, and or your graveyard for a Divine card. Reveal it and put it into your hand. So a way to get the Divine cards into your hand that we're going to see in just a moment. And then we have 1 copy here of our minion Angel, which is Rosalia, a legend minion. Rosalia the Martyred. Ongoing, whenever you pay a light counter to play a Divine card, which we're about to see, you may put that counter on one of your minions as a blessing, so they don't just go away, you can actually transfer it, essentially. And flying and Omen. Pretty darn powerful here. So what are these Divine cards? So Divine cards have no cost up in the corner, but there's only a specific situation in which you could actually play it, and the card text will tell you where and how you'd play it, and how many light counters you're going to have to pay to do it. So that's why you're putting those light counters that you don't put out there as a blessing onto your skill card. Because, and yes, I did just smack this thing. Because you can then pay those light counters that are on your skill card to actually bring out the divine cards. But when they're gone, they just go to the graveyard. So we have Aura of Recuperation, 2 copies of this. Whenever you attack with a minion, you may pay 1 light counter to play this card and heal up to 3 damage from that minion. Also 2 Aura of Might. Whenever you attack with a minion, again, you may pay 1 light counter, again, to play this card to give that minion +3 attack. Then we have some that are just kind of one-offs here. Those past 2 were Grace type. This is a Miracle type. Angelic Embrace. Whenever it is your turn to attack, you may pay 2 light counters to play this card and reinforce any number of your minions as though they had flying. Revelation of Despair. Now, Revelations are another card type here. You can only have 1 of these in any given battlefield at any given time, but Revelation of Despair says, whenever you perform an action, you may pay 3 light counters to play this card into any battlefield. Put this card into your discard pile at the end of the round, but the ongoing ability during that round while it's out, enemy minions get -1 attack, and whenever they attack, they are weakened. So that's nice. Then we have Denial as a Miracle here. Whenever an opponent plays a sorcery during the action phase, you may pay 2 light counters to play this card and cancel that sorcery's effects. Then that opponent immediately takes an action for free, so you cancel it, but they don't just lose the action. They can still do something. Another Revelation here, Revelation of Wrath. Whenever you perform an action, you may pay 3 light counters to play this card into any battlefield. Put this card in your discard pile at the end of the round, so just like the last one. Ongoing, your minions get +2 attack. Whenever one of your minions attacks, heal 1 damage from it. So, kind of a cool little mechanism here. Lots of things gaining you counters that you have a couple of different uses for, whether it's divine in certain circumstances or just beefing up the minions that are out there with that +1/+1 bonus, regardless of how they're being used. Then we have the one regular Kickstarter exclusive domain pack, not tied to any stretch goals, which is Bewitched Woodland. And this one, as you can see, is basically based around fair folk or fairies and unicorns here as beasts. Very much more like the unicorns in a little small bit of a cabin in the woods, more so than what we see in most uses of unicorns. So the theme for this one is choice, which we'll see with those Grimoire cards. Here's the skill card. So there's the symbol down there, and then the tactic ability here. You may exhaust this skill card to ready the attacking minion after its attack. Single hits count as blank on its next attack this round. But then there's 2 copies each of all 5 of the different cards in this particular deck, or piece of a deck, pack. So I have the Sealy Courtier. When destroyed, you may choose 1. Ready a minion with attack 2 or less, or heal up to 2 damage from a minion. So again, a choice. Then Indisputable Sovereign. Ongoing, whenever a damage counter is placed on this minion, choose 1. Weaken an enemy minion, or gain an omen. 2 of that as well. Then Untamed Sovereign. Ongoing, whenever this minion becomes exhausted, choose 1. You may draw a card, and you may weaken a minion, or gain an omen, and you may heal 1 damage from one of your minions. 2 there. Notice we've got some flying here. We got some omens mixed in here. Then we have Woodland Spirit as a sorcery. Choose 1 again, but in this case, it's 3 choices you can go with. So we have heal 1 damage from each of up to 3 of your minions in a single battlefield, or gain an omen and heal up to 2 damage from one of your minions, or you may weaken an enemy and you may draw a card. Then lastly, Unseelie Provocateur. When played, choose 1, exhaust an enemy minion with attack 2 or less, or steal an omen from an opponent. Choice-based. Here, usually 2 options, 1 with 3 options there, but it's a sorcery, so it goes away. But a pretty neat little theme, because of course, with the fairies and stuff like that, making the bargains and all thematically kind of works. Then we have the first of the stretch goal characters. So this is a character that is considered Kickstarter exclusive, but was unlocked through several different stretch goals for different cards and whatnot that then were combined together to make the actual pack, just like we saw last time with that first Kickstarter. So Tatsu is our first, and she had a ton of things renamed for her. So we'll look at her stuff here in just a moment, but just as far as stretch goals go, at $65,000, we unlocked 3 copies of Edge of Darkness, which became Daughter of the Dragon. Then 2 copies of Katana at $83,000, which became Dragon's Tail. Then we had 3 copies of Jade Emperor, that name didn't change, at $100,000. And 2 copies of Circlets, known here as Dragon Scales, unlocked at $117,000. And then the whole thing, which basically meant getting her skill card and then making it into a pack, which in this case necessitated a rule card, that all happened at $133,000. But I would say it's interesting that even though the names changed, unlike what we saw a lot of times with stretch goal packs last time around, None of the numbers of cards change, just the names of them. Now, for Tatsu, we have a rule card again. This one actually double-sided because there's quite a few bits and pieces, but interestingly, a couple of them are about specific cards this time, which you don't usually necessarily see with the special rules. Usually it's more kind of broad rules for the character. So we start out with her character skill card, Action, exhaust the skill card or choose one. Draw 2 cards, then conceal a card, we'll talk about that in a moment, or attack with your avatar with a value of 1. Add +1 for each of your concealed cards. There's her symbol there, by the way. So what's up with this concealing cards? Basically, during her turn, she can spend an action to take a card, flip it face down, and stick it underneath her character card. And then some of those cards will have an unveil ability that lets you, when something triggers them, pull them out and use them right then. But any of the ones that are attached and considered concealed give +1 to this type of attack. And if she ever, maybe something like Shapeshifter gives her the ability to attack without using this, because usually your avatars aren't themselves the ones attacking. If something else were to give her the ability to attack, like say attack for 2 or attack for 3, that would be the base value instead of 1, and you'd still add the +1 for each of your concealed cards underneath it. So the concealment just basically makes her attacks more deadly. So you have Daughter of the Dragon. Attacking with that avatar is pretty important. So this is another one that lets her do that, even if that character skill card has already been exhausted. You can still do another attack thanks to this card, and doing that doesn't exhaust the skill card. So you got one attack definitely basically per round using your skill card, but then if you got these cards, you can also do it again. And there's actually 3 of these in there, and they give you an omen, and they only cost 1, which is nice, but they are sorcery, so they do go to the graveyard when you play them. You have Dragon's Tail. This is one of those unveil ones. So you would conceal this under your character, and then unveil. Whenever one of your minions would receive a damage counter, you may unveil this card and play it attached to that minion, then prevent that damage. So it's like they're being attacked, but instead of taking the damage, like, whoa, they pull out the Dragon's Tail, block it, and now they've got it to help add to their attack. Now, I will say, I do wonder if this has a little bit of errata, because if you look at the rule card says that Dragon's Tail prevents the damage from the critical hit that allowed it to be unveiled. Any additional critical hits may be assigned to the attached minion as normal. If the attacking minion is destroyed by the Dragon Tail's 1 damage, any remaining battle dice are still assigned as normal. That really doesn't feel like it's fitting what it's saying here, so I'm assuming there's some errata related to that one. Then we have Jade Emperor. There's 2 copies of that one. We have Jade Emperor Unveil. So you'd put it under, then unveil it. It's another attachment. Whenever a player would evaluate damage during an attack, you may unveil this card and play it attached to one of your minions, then pick any number of battle dice and re-roll them. Note, this happens after the regular dice rolling, because it's when you're evaluating damage, when damage is already being assigned. So when you then do this re-roll, there's no way to do any re-rolls of this re-roll. Whatever the results are from this become final. That is also specified there on the rule card. Then we have, after 3 copies of that one, 2 copies of Dragon Scales. Another unveil. Whenever you attack with a minion, you may unveil this card and play it attached to that minion, then weaken each enemy minion. Notice it does, though, have that symbol there, so each one in that battlefield. To clarify what I'm saying here about that errata, or potential errata, it's not actually in their official FAQ yet. It says it prevents the damage from the critical hit that allowed it to be unveiled. Nothing here says it has to be a critical hit. But presumably, it's just clarifying that, yes, if there are multiple critical hits, then it prevents the one, but then any other ones can still come through as normal, because critical hits are assigned first, and they're assigned by the attacker in that case. This says, even if the attacking minion is destroyed by Dragon Tail's 1 damage, any remaining battle dice are still assigned as normal. What damage? What damage is Dragon Tail giving at all? So I'm really not getting where even if the attacking minion is destroyed by Dragon Tail's 1 damage, meaning the minion is attacking and Dragon Tail is doing 1 damage back, and the remaining dice are still assigned as normal. But how would it give that 1 attack back based on the text of the card, which simply says that whenever one of your minions would receive a damage counter, you may unveil this card and play it attached to that minion, then prevent that damage. It says nothing about striking back at all. Then we have our first domain pack that was unlocked through stretch goals, coming after Tatsu in the stretch goal order here. And I didn't want to spoil the surprise a little bit earlier in my excitement about being able to use, Keepers of Progeny with Sigismund to get a vampire theme going, because, ladies and gentlemen, another vampire theme. This is the Bloodcursed ship, which has 3 copies, 2 copies, 2 copies, 2 copies, and 1 copy, with some more vampires entering play here. And I apologize in my excitement about another vampire deck component. I almost forgot to mention which parts were the stretch goals to build this thing up. So 3 copies of Rushing Kindred came at $150,000. 2 copies, which became 3 of Mad Bloodseeker, came at $166,000. Lazarus the Plaguebringer came at $183,000. 2 copies of Unholy Revenant came at $200,000, and 2 copies of Homicidal Fiend at $216,000. So no name changes, but they did transfer 1 of the Rushing Kindred, because there's 2 there, over to Mad Bloodseeker, which was originally supposed to have 2, but wound up with 3. So in this case, the theme is going to be around destroyed minions, whether voluntarily or otherwise. But here's the skill card, which is the tactic. There's your symbol there. Tactic, you may exhaust this skill card to give the attacking minion +1 or +2 attack. After its attack, if you choose +2, destroy it, and you may draw 2 cards. The domain is actually the Atlantic Ocean in this case. So we have 3 copies of Mad Bloodseeker. As a tactic, you may destroy this minion at the end of its attack to search your grimoire, shuffling afterwards, as always, for a minion with cost 3 or less, and play it exhausted without paying its cost. Homicidal Fiend, another tactic. You may destroy this minion, again, to put 2 battle dice into play, each showing a critical hit. They can be re-rolled as normal, however. Rushing Kindred. Kindred! Hell yeah! Nice reference there to, not to Wise Wizard, but a World of Darkness in that case. Kind of cool. Then when played and ongoing, which is an unusual thing, to do it when played and as an ongoing ability. Whenever one of your minions, including this one, is played or destroyed, if its printed cost, attack, and essence are all equal, that's all 3 of these, like 3, 3, 3, you may choose 1. Draw a card or weaken an enemy minion. 2 copies of that. 2 copies also of Unholy Revenant. Tactic, you may destroy this minion at the end of the attack to search your grimoire, shuffling afterwards for a minion with cost 2 or less, and play it exhausted without paying its cost. And the other one that has a 1 copy limit here is our Legend minion, which is Lazarus Plaguebearer. Ongoing, whenever one of your minions is destroyed, including this one, gain an omen, and you may weaken a minion to draw a card. Then we have the second of the stretch goal characters here. This is Merlin. Very much a departure, I would say, from what we tend to think of when we think Merlin. In this case, 10 cards made up of 2 copies each of 5 cards. The numbers did not change. The names did not change. The only big difference between what was described in the stretch goals and here is that there was a need for a rule card that didn't happen to be mentioned in the stretch goals. The last stretch goal is always just to add the skill card, add the standee, and turn whatever it is into a pack, and if there's rules needed, they just add it. So we had Spore Collector at $250,000. We had Spore Preserver at $267,000. Spore Harmonizer at $284,000. At $300,000, we had Spore Shepherd, and at $317,000, we had Spore Warden. The whole thing was turned into a pack at $334,000. So this one, also a little bit unusual, but actually kind of uses some familiar rules. If you played with Children of Elysia, that is the werewolf deck, basically, the werewolf lineage from back in the original Kickstarter material. They used forms that could either be minions or attachments, and so does Merlin here. It gives specifics about that, and then a little bit about how they work. Basically, any of these minions we're going to see that are listed as form minions could be minions. They could be forms as attachments. They get treated as one or the other, not both. They get treated as minions when they're in your grimoire or in the graveyard or in your hand. And essentially these forms, when they're used as attachments, give the essence and attack values as bonuses, like an attachment would, to whatever they're attached to, and make them a fungus type. So first let's look at the skill card. There's the symbol down there. We have action. Exhaust this skill card to play up to 2 of this type, Merlin, forms from your hand without paying their costs, or search your grimoire, shuffle afterwards for up to 3 fungus, basically Merlin, forms, reveal them, and put them into your hand. They have to specify again because you could be playing this with Children of Elysia. You have a lot of forms in play. So again, 2 copies each. So Spore Collector here. When destroyed, you may search your grimoire, shuffle afterwards for up to 2 of these Merlin forms, reveal them and put them in your hand, and shuffle this form into your grimoire. So it's a form, it is a fungus, and it has that little star there, because it could be just a regular attack in essence, or it could be an attachment here for a cost of 1. Spore Preserver, same kind of notation here. When destroyed, weaken a minion, then weaken a minion an additional time for each of your other fungus minions. Shuffle this form into your grimoire. It's worth noting that even if you have multiple fungus attachments on the same minion, it still just treats it as one fungus minion, because it's still just counting the minion, not the attachments. Spore Harmonizer. When destroyed, draw a card plus an additional card for each of your other fungus minions. Shuffle this form into your grimoire. So again, the idea with these, in some of these cases, is, the more you can spread the fungus around, the more bonus you're going to get. But it means they're out there as forms, not minions, giving bonuses rather than being standalone. Spore Warden. When destroyed, your fungus minions get +2 attack until the end of the battle phase. Shuffle this form into your grimoire, which is nice. Goes back. And Spore Shepherd, when destroyed, gain an omen plus an additional omen for each of your other fungus minions. Again, shuffle this form into your grimoire. So most of them playing off the number out there. So get to attaching these to get those bonuses. They were briefly going to skip the other one that was tied into financial stretch goals, because that's the one they had to deal with after the fact. We'll look at that next. The other stretch goal that was unlocked during the campaign is the Forlorn Opera House Domain Pack. And this is a little bit unusual in the sense that there were actually only 5 stretch goals. They were all social stretch goals. And what wound up happening was they were meaning to unlock 3 of these 2 cards here. And instead, they did it as 2, and then used these other 2 cards that they kind of removed from that pair to give another card that actually wasn't even listed in the stretch goals there. So we had, at 100 retweets on Twitter of a particular tweet, we had what was supposed to be Angel Caligaris, now listed as Angel the Tinkerer. At 100 new followers on Twitch, Telemachus. At 200 shares and page likes on Facebook, 2 of what was meant to be Mesmerizing Augur, but instead became Unliquidated Augur. At 200 new subscribers on YouTube, 3 copies, which became 2 of Disillusioned Artist. The name actually stayed the same there, just like Telemachus there. And then 3 copies of Fear Itself, renamed to Mirroring and dropped to 2 copies, at 1,000 total ratings on Board Game Geek. And then again, one of these copies, one of those 3 copies, used for Piper. This all became a nice new pack with a skill card and all, simply after unlocking all 5 of the previous stretch goals. So there wasn't a 6th goal to reach. So here's our skill card here, located in Boston. I know, terrible fake accent there. And there's the symbol here. Dang it. Now I'm going to have to go back and rewatch Phantom of the Opera, the actual live performance Blu-ray, not the movie. Though the movie was okay. Anyway, the Forlorn Opera House here, there's not really a theme, at least not that I can suss out of this, but it has some really interesting kind of oddball effects. So I like it, but it's hard for me to pin down a theme to it here. So the tactic on the skill card here, you may exhaust this skill card. If you do, it's a tactic, of course, gain an omen, and you may reveal a minion from your hand. If it is the same type of minion, vampire, zombie, etc., as the attacking minion, and of course you'll know that from what's happening, the attacking minion gets +2 attack. That's pretty cool. Then Angel the Tinkerer, legend minion here, ongoing. Whenever you play or reveal 1 or more minions, weaken an enemy minion. Attachments, you may draw a card. Sorceries, gain an omen. Pretty versatile, pretty cool. Cost of 4 though. Speaking of high cost, Telemachus here at 5. Ongoing ability at the start of each battle phase, picking minion type, again, vampire, zombie, whatever, until the end of the battle phase, your minions of that type get +2 attack. Unliquidated Augur, couple copies of this one. Ongoing, whenever you play or reveal a minion, look at the top 2 cards of your deck, draw either of them, and put the other into your discard pile. Disillusioned Artist, couple copies of this one. A permanent card, so it applies both in and out of play and cannot be blanked. So it just is always this. But what's cool about being always this is he's kind of like a shapeshifter type thing almost thematically, but not like using the shapeshifter mechanism we've seen in that previous video. Because this card has every name and card type and deck symbol of every printed Grimoire card. So things that bounce off of those or trigger off of those can do so off of this card. That is really cool and could very easily be exploited. We have Mirroring, 2 copies again. Search your Grimoire, shuffle afterwards for a non-legend minion with cost 4 or less and reveal it. Put the minion into your hand, then copy any when played or when destroyed effect it has. Use your avatar standee's battlefield for that location, because of course it'll be in your hand, not actually in play. And the 2 copies of that one that wasn't really a stretch goal, but wound up being created by pulling 1 copy each of a couple of them. We have Piper. When played, you may play a sorcery with cost 2 or less from your hand without paying its cost. Return it to your hand instead of putting it into your graveyard. So that's pretty cool. Play this, play a sorcery, and then bring it back. 2 for 1 card play, and you don't even lose the second card. Then finally, the last pack is yet another stretch goal Kickstarter exclusive pack, which is Nicodemus. It's a new character, and this is the one that wasn't quite unlocked during the campaign. We unlocked, and I say we because, of course, I was a backer, 2 copies of Sacred Study at $350,000, 2 copies of Essence Prevailer at $366,000, 2 copies of Symbol of Humanity at $383,000, 2 copies of Candlelight Keeper at $400,000, and 2 copies of Whispering Silencer at $417,000. And then the plan was to unlock the skill card and turn it into a pack, which of course then gives it the tokens there and the rule card at $433,000. But they came up about $9,000-ish short, $8,000 to $9,000 short of that. So what they wound up doing after the fact, just like they did, in the first Kickstarter when something didn't get fully unlocked and individual promo cards make 0 sense whatsoever for this game, was they basically did a live stream conversation with the designer of the game, Peter Schultz, and then they put that video up on Board Game Geek. And all they asked in order to unlock this last stretch goal to combine this into a new character pack was to get 250 likes on that video, which was super easy. Barely an inconvenience, some might say. So now we have the Nicodemus character pack here. One that actually has its own new tokens, which was relatively rare this go-around. We'll see many more tokens and such in Endbringer itself. So again, we have the need for a rule card. It is double-sided, and it all basically comes down to these 8 new tokens. They have an active and an inactive side. They're known as stigma tokens or stigma counters. And the idea is that some of these cards, you'll notice, have a stigma counter symbol underneath their cost. And what happens kind of depends on what type of card it is. If you're playing a sorcery, obviously that's not actually going into a battlefield. It's just you play it and then it's in your graveyard because it's kind of like an effect type card. If you were to do that, you would take one of those stigma counters and place it on any one of your minions or on your character skill card, active side up. Now, if it was something you played to a battlefield, like an attachment or like a minion, then in that case, you would still put it on either your character skill card or onto a minion, except there are more restrictions. It would have to be a minion in that battlefield, maybe even the one you just played, and the only way you could choose to put it on your character skill card is if your avatar is actually in that battlefield. But either way, and pardon me if the view just shifted there, I kind of knocked into my tripod here, but basically what they do when they are on a minion is they kind of act like omen tokens, essentially. So if that particular minion were to attack and you wanted to re-roll a battle die, then you could flip one of those stigma tokens from active to inactive instead of paying an omen. Or if your avatar happens to be in the same battlefield, you can flip one of the ones that is on your character skill card, but then it stays deactivated until you reactivate those tokens. You don't remove the tokens, but they go to inactive. But then your character skill card has the ability to make them active again. So let's start looking at cards here. Again, it's the skill card and then 2 copies each of the others. So in action, there's his symbol there. Action, exhaust this skill card to put a stigma counter on one of your minions and a stigma counter on this card. So both, rather than just one or the other of the options. Then activate all of your stigma counters, so all the ones already out there, and draw 2 cards. I say all the ones already out there. There's only 8 of the tokens available. But then draw 2 cards. So pretty cool there. So we have Sacred Study, which does require it. It is a sorcery. Put a stigma counter on one of your minions and a stigma counter on your character skill card. So kind of like that action just a moment ago. Then draw a card for each active stigma counter on your character skill card, which is pretty cool. Essence Prevailer, ongoing. This minion gets +1 attack for each active stigma counter on it. Limit of +4. So Again, making another use of those tokens rather than just the re-rolling. We have an attachment here with Symbol of Humanity. As a tactic, notice no symbol there, you may deactivate up to 3 stigma counters on the attached minion to draw that many cards and gain that many omens. Of course, it has to be the attached minion. There's no need for the symbol there because it's not an effect on the battlefield one way or the other. That's limited to location. It's limited to that minion. Candlelight Keeper, when destroyed, gain an omen for each active stigma counter you have, limit of 4 omens. Whispering Silencer, when destroyed, for each active stigma counter you have, weaken an enemy minion, limit of 4 times. You may pick the same or different minions each time. And that is all of the new Grimoire components, the characters, lineages, and domain packs, all available through the second Kickstarter, primarily based on Sorcerer Endbringer. Again, though, as a reminder, only 1 new character, 1 new domain, and 1 new lineage is actually available at retail. All the others are Kickstarter exclusive. That is 4 more Kickstarter exclusive characters, 3 new Kickstarter exclusive domains, and 1 new Kickstarter exclusive lineage. So I want to give you some math here. There are now 34 total Grimoire components. 14 characters, 8 lineages, 12 domains. 16 of them, or 47%, are Kickstarter exclusive. That is basically half of your player creation, your Grimoire creation options, all locked away by Kickstarter exclusivity. For some, that will be a deal breaker. So if you're only playing retail and you have all the retail stuff from the first and second waves of content, then the number of possible Grimoire combinations you have from these 6 retail characters, 6 retail lineages, and 6 retail domains is only going to be 216. Now, that's a lot, but compare it to if you have all the Kickstarter exclusive stuff as well. That is 14 characters, 8 lineages, and 12 domains. In that case, the possible Grimoire combinations you have jumps to 1,344. In other words, with just the retail content, you only have 16% of the possible combinations for your Grimoire. The other 84% of possible combinations are locked away behind Kickstarter exclusivity. If you're gonna play this game, look for the exclusives, either by backing future campaigns that they do, because they always make their exclusive stuff available in subsequent campaigns, even if it's not for the same game, or hunt them down on eBay, because you're going to want them if you're going to be playing Sorcerer for any decent length of time. Now, one thing that they added for the game that'll be useful to really any players, though if you're not getting Endbringer, you may have some unused ones, is a set of nice plastic dividers, kind of like they did for those storage boxes and whatnot for Hero Realms and Star Realms that you could get. Remember that the regular boxes just come with sort of categorical dividers, and they're not great. They don't fit the well very well, so I've shaved down the edges of either side here. These do fit very well, and they're designed so that basically you have art of one of the cards on one side, kind of expanded art there, and then of course a tab there with black with a name and whatever the relevant symbol is for that particular Grimoire component. And you flip them over, you've also got a copy of the skill card for that particular one. What I wind up doing is I put them in there, but then I alternate them as I go, so that it's easier to see the names of the ones that are close together. That is more of an issue with characters and domains to flip them. When it comes to lineages, it's all just the middle part, so they all kind of are in a line, but there's enough cards in those that the dividers are far enough apart to see them easily. Definitely a nice little set here. So character-wise, going in alphabetical order so I can more easily put them away. We have Ariaspes, Jalisa, who I believe I said is Jalessa over and over again in the last video. I apologize for that. I always mispronounce her name. Merlin, Miselda, Nicodemus, Ragnar, Seth, Sigismund, Tatsu, Tegu, Thinok, Virgiliu, Wachiwi, and Zevrain. But those are just for the characters, and notice all the character ones have their label on the upper left side. Then we have our lineage dividers. Originally it was just this in the core game. We have our lineage dividers here with the tab in the middle here for Children of Elysia, Followers of Usir, Hellfire Cult, House of Petro, Keepers of Progeny, Oberon's Kingdom, Sword of Gabriel, and Sylvani. Again, with the skill card on the back. Then we have the domains, originally just this divider here. So of course now we have the domain ones with the little tab off to the right for Bewitched Woodland, Bloodcursed Ship, Blood-Soaked Fjord, Forgotten Temple, Forlorn Opera House, Forsaken Church, Haunted Forest, Lunatic Asylum, Outcast Sanctuary, Royal Palace, Screaming Coast, and Witch Mountain. And then finally, while on the subject of dividers, we are going to go ahead here and look at the dividers that relate to the Endbringer content. We'll look at what all this stuff actually is and what these decks mean when we actually look at Endbringer. But to round out what you actually get in that divider add-on for the 20 bucks, we have dividers for your Nemeses. Okay, the Nemeses divider here, I have sliced this one as well. That just automatically comes with Endbringer, but if you get the pack, you get one for each of the actual 4 Endbringers. Erlik Khan, Ereshkigal, Hypnos, and Zcerneboch, if I'm saying that correctly. Then you have what are called archetypes, again, with just a regular divider there in the regular set. Notice here the Nemeses all have them on the top left, like characters. Same thing here. The archetypes have them in the middle, just like Lineages here. So we have the dividers for Deathdealer, Demiurge, Hellraiser, and Plaguebringer. And the other component you've got, the other main thing that makes up the Endbringer that you're fighting and the situation that you're dealing with in solo and cooperative is what are called monoliths. So we have sort of the standard one that's in the game, scenario/other monoliths here, with it off to either the right or left, whichever direction you want to flip it. Same thing with Nemesis. You could flip it either way. But then you actually have a Monoliths divider card. As to what is on the back of these, the Monolith one is a little bit odd just because it has just a Monolith image on the back, which is what we see on the card backs. Whereas for any of these, there are going to be these large cards that provide special rules and special circumstances and whatnot to play with these particular Nemeses or archetypes. And what they've done on the backs of these is basically just encapsulated the text that you would see on any of those cards, just shrunk down to regular card size pretty much there. So kind of like with the skill cards, just having something on the back. And of course you can flip them whichever way makes sense when you're organizing. I definitely think that the organizers are worth the 20 bucks. Now, if you are someone who is interested only in the PvP side of Sorcerer, you are good to go. This was all there was for PvP, so feel free to end it here. Everything we're going to see after this point is for the 1 to 3 player solo/cooperative mode, all provided by the Endbringer Box, which introduces entirely new types of components and new mix and match characters, in this case, as the enemies you will fight rather than the characters you'll be playing. Thanks for watching. If you're only interested in PvP, I appreciate your viewing. For those who are into solo and co-op, let's dive into Endbringer itself. So this here is Sorcerer Endbringer, the second new core box, but again, only necessary if you want to play solo or cooperative. The main game supports up to 6 players for PvP, as long as you have those extra 2 player boards and enough of the different packs necessary to make your Grimoires. This only supports 1 to 3 players cooperative. We will see why as we see how these so-called monoliths are set up to set up your win conditions for the game. But the cover here, Sorcerer Endbringer, nice action scene designed by Peter Schultz with Rob Doherty and Darwin Castle. And notice there that as opposed to last time we saw Sorcerer, they have changed their name since. They are now Wise rather than White Wizard Games. Same company, different name. You have just the logo on the one side here. The top edge gives us shots of some of the Nemeses you'll see there with the title up at the top, Wise Wizard Games down at the bottom. And that's going to be your left-hand side if you're looking at the box cover, and the right-hand side if you're looking at the cover. So you do have the ability to store this either vertically or horizontally with one of the sides facing outward, and whichever way, you'll still be able to read it normally. You take the lid off, and I actually took all the content out so I can easily show you the back without messing up any organization. We have information about one of the Endbringers, one of the Nemeses on this side, another on this side, another on the other side, and then, of course, the fourth one, right? So all the different Nemeses you may face wind up on the edges. Pretty convenient that there are 4. So diving into this here on the back, we have Sorcerer Endbringer. We have some examples of some of the cards that we're going to see, some of the other components and whatnot. I'll just kind of read through this, kind of hit stuff as we go along. So first off, the story. And I'm sure that's pretty hard to read with that font through the video here. So what it says is, the Endbringers are ancient demigods who unleashed unspeakable horrors and destruction upon our world, and were consequently banished by the Elder Gods. A deranged and power-hungry cult has constructed powerful monoliths, allowing an Endbringer to return to our world. You must break through the Endbringer's army and destroy the monoliths in order to banish the demigod once again. So that kind of sets up what our different win conditions setup is going to be here, at least for the players, right? So in the original game, you're not fighting the other sorcerer directly. Instead, you're trying to conquer 2 battlefields in a standard 2-player game. Here, instead of fighting the demigod directly, because you're just a puny little sorcerer compared to them being a godly and so forth, or demigodly, instead, they are being kept in this realm, essentially, by these monoliths, and your goal is to destroy those monoliths. Now, that's one of the ways that the game will scale. You're going to be fighting across 3 battlefields as in a standard 2-player game, though you're not fighting over the battlefields themselves. And each location will have 1 monolith per player. They all have 9 health, and to win you need to destroy all of them, unless there's an alternative win condition in certain situations. So that means if you're playing with 1 player, it's 1 at each location, or 3 total. But if you're playing with 3 players, it's 3 at each location for 9 total. That's the way it scales what you need to do to win based on the player count. What we will find is that the Endbringer, as there's no fighting over conquering lands or anything, is actually trying to essentially wipe out the sorcerers by wiping out a combined life pool, so to speak. 30 per player. So it's 30 for the player versus needing to take out 27, 3 times 9, for the solo game, and then scaling up from there on both ends of the situation. We'll see more about it as we see the different components and whatnot. Speaking of components, down here, various bits and pieces that we'll see, standees and tokens and all that kind of stuff. There's that life counter there. We'll see that in just a moment. Over here, one important thing about how this is going to work is that just like your Sorcerer's Grimoire is going to be made up of 3 different components, typically the enemy you're going up against, the Endbringer, is going to also be composed of either 3 or 2 components, not counting the monoliths. You have the Nemesis, the Archetype, and optionally a scenario. You can play without scenarios. The game comes with 4 of each. So given the fact that you always play with a Nemesis, always play with an Archetype, and can play either with one of the 4 scenarios or without any scenario at all, so there's actually 5 possibilities for scenarios, that means there are 80 different possible combinations out of this box for what you'll face in a solo or co-op game. It reads, this game expansion allows 1 to 3 players to team up and battle against a crazed demigod known as an Endbringer. The Sorcerer base game is required to play. Then down here it continues, you'll create the Endbringer by combining 1 of 4 Nemeses, who they are, 1 of 4 Archetypes, which army they lead, and optionally 1 of 4 scenarios, what they are doing. For example, you may battle Erlik Khan, the Deathdealer, who is leading the invasion. There are 64 different combinations you can battle against. Again, I would say it's actually 80, because you can play without a scenario. So it's not 4 times 4 times 4 to get the combinations, it's 4 times 4 times 5. That number is ignoring the fact that the scenarios are optional. But anyway, there are 64 different combinations you can battle against, each providing unique challenges for you and your friends to overcome. Contents include 12 oversized cards, 260 standard cards, a health dial, 4 oversized standees, 77 other punch-outs, and a rulebook. Then you have the website, QR code, ages 14 plus, 90 plus minutes, 1 to 3 players, Wise Word Games, UPC, little warning stuff, legalese, copyright. Interestingly, the copyright is 2022, so even the copyright on the box is for a year beyond the original delivery date, and yet still 2 years before when it actually delivered. This was a comically late Kickstarter, but I digress. So knowing what's going to be in here, let's take a look here. We're going to go through the Nemeses, we're going to go through the Archetypes, we're going to go through the scenarios, and then we're going to take a look at the monoliths And essentially, that is all the stuff that's in here. Everything you need for solo or co-op, but nothing for PvP, because again, they took those coastal battlefields out of this, despite them being listed as content on the Kickstarter. They removed them so they could be purchased separately for PvP players. But before we can look at any of that, we do need to look at the rulebook. So here's the rulebook, kind of that cracked-looking format here, but similar in style to the previous one. Table of contents and what goes where in the box and whatnot linked to the FAQ, but no actual detailed content listing. There's sort of a detailed listing, at least for the Nemesis and Archetype stuff, but nothing beyond that, which is kind of frustrating, honestly, but thankfully there's not much beyond that. You have some story prologue, general overview, and how the Nemesis deck and Archetype deck that we're going to see works, some information about new game terms, Endbringer-specific rules, general rules that have now been essentially updated for even the base game, assuming you've read this rulebook, but it's more about, like, when timing things happen. There's a start of the battle phase versus something at the start of the battle and so on, which are two different things. Or not having infinite combos and whatnot, all that kind of stuff. An example of the setup, then it talks you through setting up, and a suggestion for your first play. Then how the gameplay itself works, not how the whole thing works, because essentially the player's turn works the same as it does for the most part in the base game, in PvP, but what changes take place and then what happens with the actual Endbringer that you're fighting. Some nice information about adjusting difficulty. There's actually 4 different difficulty modes that you can use here, so that's kind of a nice little addition here, because this is a freaking hard solo or co-op game. So it's nice to at least have a beginner mode and a normal mode. Veteran and hard use specific monoliths that are pretty rough. So we'll talk about those just a little bit more as we go through and see what those components are, because it won't really make sense until we have a chance to do that. And then there's a breakdown and some specific rules and setup information for each Nemesis. Some of these are pretty complex. Then for each archetype. Then the scenarios, which doesn't have nearly as much information here. Your credits, and you're done. Kind of a no fuss, no muss kind of rulebook here. So a few things here as we're heading towards looking at the Nemeses first. Important things to know to kind of make sense of the game. As I mentioned, you are going to be having sort of a pool of defense, or a pool of life, if you want to call it that, for the heroes. Well, the sorcerers. I'm not sure you'd call all of them heroes. But especially on this score dial here. 30 per player, you set it at the start, and essentially, as you take damage, it will drop. There's essentially 3 types of damage to deal with. There's direct damage, and that comes straight from your defense pool. There is damage in a particular battlefield, and that can be spread across your minions, but if you don't put it on a minion, just like in the original game in PvP where you'd put it on the battlefield itself, instead it comes off of here. Then there's global damage, which is kind of like damage in a battlefield, but you can spread it across any of the different locations, but any that you don't put on a minion, again, has to go off your defense dial here. And likewise, if you were to do some kind of ability that heals damage on a battlefield, it heals this instead. Then you're also going to have standees for the different Nemeses. And you'll notice these are kind of big. They each have slots at the bottom for 2 of these little bases that are provided. These are Hypnos, Erlik, Ereshkigal, and Zcerneboch. But there's a reason why they're so big. That is because, as I mentioned, you're playing with 3 locations, as in a standard 2-player PvP game. In this case, I do have them face down, because again, unless you're going to use abilities on locations, you would have them face down. If you want to use the abilities, you'd have them face up. I just grabbed the coastal ones, and again, were meant to be part of Endbringer initially, but were separated out to make it easier for people to get their hands on for PvP. But they are so large, they don't fit in one, though, technically they do. But within the game world's logic, they actually fit in 2. The Endbringer will always be occupying 2 locations at a time. The center, always, obviously, but whether it's center and left or center and right, that is going to depend on a roll of your energy die, which is a D8. I don't know why it is they say just use an 8-sided die and then they don't include one. It's because you already got one here as an energy die, but they don't call it an energy die in this case. Kind of weird, but anyway, basically during setup you're going to roll that, and on a 1 to 4, they go into the center and left. On a 5 to 8, they go center and right. And you might recall that in the ready phase of the original PvP version of the game, you had the first player gaining the fate counter full side up. In this case, all players are going to have a fate counter, and they all just refresh it during the ready phase. There is now a new first step, though, where they resolve any start of round or start of ready phase effects, which, would have been the case before. They just didn't mention it here. And then, again, you have that new version of step 1, where basically everybody flips their fate counters over, so they've got access to them again, but there is no first player passing back and forth kind of thing again. You ready all exhausted cards in play, same as before. The first player rolls the energy die, or has all players gain 4 energy. Same thing, only in this case it's not, trying to strategically outwit your opponent, it's figuring out what's best for the group. Each player sets their action tracker to 6, as before. Each player gains 1 omen, as before. But then before the step where you start with the first player and put their avatars in any battlefield, which really doesn't matter, first player or whoever, put him in a battlefield for solo and co-op, there's an extra step in between here where you will roll that die again to determine where the Endbringer is for that upcoming turn. So the Endbringer doesn't just start in one place at the beginning of the game and stay there, but they also don't have like a reinforce action necessarily. It's going to be that every single round, you don't know where they're going to end up. But you do know before you put your avatars in whatever battlefield they're going to be in. So you have that knowledge, but it's not like you know from turn to turn, okay, I'm going to deploy some minions this time because I know he's going to be over here on the next turn. You don't know that. It could change. Thankfully, though, there's only really 2 options, and the center is always going to be where the Endbringer is. So our first Nemesis here is Erlik Khan. The type there is Nemesis Promethean. Promethean is essentially the name of this group of demigods, essentially. And he's considered low complexity, not a lot of extra rules for him. He does have these little hate counters. Just has his face on either side. There are 7 of those total. And then you have an oversized Nemesis card. There's his symbol down here that'll be on all of his Nemesis deck cards as well. And it is the same thing on either side of the card. That'll be the case every single time. No point in showing it every time. And basically the idea is that there are special rules for him. And in his case, they're all nicely set up there on his card. So there'll be points at which, as an ongoing ability, it tells them to gain a rage counter. You'll put one of these onto his card. Then also ongoing, at the start of each round after the first round, you'll generate a rage counter. So other things might cause you to generate rage, but at the beginning of every single round after the first, you're going to put one on it automatically. And then, what are those for? The last one there, ongoing. Whenever there are 5 or more rage counters on this card, remove 5 of them and take 5 global damage. Again, that is what can be spread across any of the battlefields to your minions, or taken as a hit to the score dial for the players. Remember, if the players hit 0 on that dial, they're essentially out of health. The damage they can take has been reduced to 0. They're done. Now, the way this is going to work, and another way that it scales, is that you'll still have your 6 actions, right, for your players, just like in PvP. But each time a player takes an action, immediately afterward, the Nemesis gets to take an action. And then the next player, and then the Nemesis, the next player, and then the Nemesis. So it's not that all the players do their thing, and then the Nemesis gets one shot, and then it's back to the players. It's after every individual player takes a turn. Immediately after that individual player's turn, he gets to go. So basically, if you've got a 1-player game, it's just alternating, no big deal. But if, say, you're playing a 3-player game, that means that in one round, each player will get 6 actions, or essentially 18 collective actions across the 3 of them, whereas the Nemesis will get 18 actions total, 1 after each of those player actions. Again, it's a scaling mechanism to make sure that it is scaling with number of players. When it is time for the Nemesis to take an action, he's going to use this Nemesis deck over here. These have a similar back to the Grimoire cards and other cards, but not quite the same, so another different card back, hence clear sleeves for these. Now, these cards are essentially, I would say, quadruple use. I think they would say probably triple use, but there is a 4th, less common use for these here. Note again the symbol there at the bottom. So they're all going to have a name. In this case, Flamestorm. There's actually 3 of these in his deck. And what matters when they're doing their action, after a player has taken an action, is this top section. It could be an action or a condition. We'll look at a condition in a moment. And you'll just do this. You'll ignore everything else. Though I would note here, this is all basically just flavor text there in the middle. You'll ignore the symbol, you'll ignore the bottom game text. Flavor text, feel free to read if you like, but it's the top part that matters in that case. So in this case, generate a rage counter unless you randomly discard a card. So this is one of these situations where if there is something that has an unless, which is kind of a newer thing in the game, basically you must be able to do that thing fully and do it, or whatever happens unless nails you. But this is just like a one-time effect and then it goes away. The other type, like this one, is a condition. This is an ongoing effect. And notice here, there's those 2 symbols before ongoing. That is because this means it applies in both of the battlefields where the Endbringer is located. Again, they're always going to be in 2 of them. So typically there's an ongoing ability. This is fueled by hatred. So ongoing, whenever an allied minion becomes exhausted, generate a rage counter. They're building up quickly. It says condition here. Again, you're ignoring this stuff for now. It does have the symbol. But there's also a number in the corner. So the idea is that when one of these comes out, it's put out into play as an ongoing condition for the battlefield, for whatever is going on at that point within the game. However, at any time when an allied minion, they call it an allied minion if they're on the player side, whoever it is, when an allied minion goes to make an attack, then during the point where you're looking at tactics, you can spend omens equal to the number here in the corner to discard this and get rid of that ongoing condition. So without going into too much detail here, because again, it's really all about those rage counters, we have 3 copies of Flamestorm, then 3 of Earthshaker, 3 of Frightful Presence, 3 of Reckless Rage, then 1 each of Fire Blast, Incinerate, Brawl, Boiling Blood, I Will Break Them, Your Story Ends Here, Fueled by Destruction, Thirst for Destruction, and those were all actions, and then getting into his conditions, we have Burning Ground, The End Begins, Tempered in Pain, Fueled by Hatred. For the most part, each Nemesis has 24 Nemesis deck cards, but one of them we will see has a 25th card, so it's not always uniform, but pretty close. Now let's look at Ereshkigal. A lot more stuff going on here, more tokens, special cards, and stuff like that. This is considered a high complexity Nemesis. Lots of information here on the card. Here is that card, if you're curious about it. The key here is there's a whole new game mechanism here and a new lose condition, or loss condition, I guess you'd call it. When the 7th gate opens, players lose the game. So what does it mean by gates? Well, this particular Nemesis has these gate tokens, 7 of them, hence when the 7th one opens, you lose. And to start the game with one of these up here, notice there's a little arrowish looking thing there. And each time you advance the gate, it will rotate until eventually it hits the point where it's going to open because you have hit 5 and it needs to move past 5. So essentially, as soon as it hits 0 again, you're going to flip it over. There'll be some type of ongoing crappy ability for a particular battlefield generally, and you're going to take this and place it in whichever battlefield has the least number of open gates already, and if there's a tie, you put it in the leftmost. So these have abilities like, at the end of the battle, destroy the allied minion with the highest cost. Pick one if tied. The other ones, again, all bad. Enemy minions get +2 attack. At the end of the battle, take damage equal to the number of enemy cultist cards and all boon counters on them. We'll talk about that in a moment. At the end of the battle, spawn a minion. Allied minions get -1 attack, and whenever they attack, weaken them. Allied minions cost 1 more to play. Whenever an allied minion enters play, deal 1 damage to it. If it's a legend, deal 2 damage to it instead. So, pretty ugly stuff here. But again, it's a race against time kind of setup. You have 7 of these special cards with that Nemesis back on it, which are the cultists. Okay? You're going to start with one of these just out on the table to create a stack for the cultists. That's the so-called ritual chamber area. And anytime that an action is to be drawn, because the other ones just get shuffled into the Nemesis deck. Anytime an action is going to happen for the Nemesis, and instead of drawing one of those regular Nemesis cards, they draw one of these, it gets placed into that pile. There are other times that you'll be drawing from that deck for those other effects on the bottom part of the card. If you were to draw it for one of those effects, you're going to wind up putting it into the discard, and the effect just doesn't happen because it doesn't have those bottom parts, but you'll place one of these 23 boon counters onto that follower, onto that cultist. Follower's the card type there. And by the way, that is the symbol for this Nemesis. So they're sitting in a stack. When played, you're advancing the gate. That's a main way of advancing the gate. And they have one essence here. Notice they have no attack. They're not a minion in battle, but they do have essence. If you roll a critical hit during a battle, you can assign the critical hit to a cultist. And that's any battlefield, not necessarily where the Nemesis is. Any battlefield. You can assign a critical hit to the cultist. However, for every boon counter on them, they get +1 essence. Basically, that boon counter is being put on whichever one has the least number of them already. So you can have several cultists all out at the same time that you're trying to take out. And that's important because if the Nemesis deck were ever to run out, anytime that happens, you just wind up reshuffling the deck and then use it again. Thing about it is, when that happens in this case, when you do have to take it and reshuffle, you wind up having to advance the gate once for each boon counter on any cultist in that ritual chamber. So you got to keep these under control because that's going to be a lot of advancing. And for what it's worth, the advancing doesn't stop. Let's say you had to advance, maybe you're on 4, you have to advance 3, 1, 2, gate opens, next one comes out, boom, the 3 goes through. It doesn't just stop when you've opened a gate. This is very much a ritual chamber management kind of thing here. Interestingly, though, the Nemesis deck, which is 25 cards this time, that's including the cultist, right? So it's 24 when the game begins because one is already out to form that ritual chamber to begin with. So it's even in that sense from a certain point of view. But it's all actions. There is not a single condition in this entire Nemesis deck. So you're not going to be dealing with those at all. You're just focused on dealing with those. So we have Greater Priest ×2. Underworld Rising also ×2. Again, we'll look at the bottom stuff in a moment. Whispers from the Underworld also ×2. Awe ×2. Queen's Will ×2. And then we're into the ones that only have 1. Queen's Wrath, Queen's Insight, Freed by Despair, Gifts from the Underworld, Imminent Extinction, Hymn of the Devoted, Hour of the Accursed. So, very thematic stuff here, and trying to keep that Netherrealm gate closed, or gates closed. Then we have our medium complexity Nemesis, Zcerneboch. It's hard for me to pronounce it. It's Zcerneboch. I think it's Zcerneboch or something like that. So you notice here that same pile of counters here, those boon counters, actually have tentacles on the back, hence why it looks sort of mismatched when we were looking at the other one. Same thing here. There's another type of token here. We'll see this one here in just a second. This is a Shadow Fiend counter. There are 17 of these, 23 of these. So they've made use of the different counters so that one side works with a particular Nemesis and the other side works with another, except for Erlik with those hate counters, since there's only 7. So you would think this looks relatively simple. Yeah, there's some tokens here, and he's got his deck over there, 24 Nemesis cards again. But this one is, again, a little more complex than Erlik, not quite as complex as Ereshkigal. So the idea for this one, it's all laid out here as well. There's his symbol. The idea is that at the beginning of the game, each player is going to take the top card of their Grimoire and set it aside face down as the beginning of what's called a rubble pile. And then different effects, or at the end of each round, each player receives rubble, which basically means they have to take another card off the top of their Grimoire and stick it face down in that stack. Now, they can remove rubble with certain abilities, and if they remove rubble, they take it out of that face-down stack, but it goes into their graveyard face-up. So it's not like they get to use it, but at least it's in the graveyard in case there's any chance to pull it back out of the graveyard at some point. The rubble pile is just pretty much straight-up inaccessible, except for removing rubble. And not only is that draining your deck, your Grimoire, At the start of each round after the first, you have to take global damage. Again, that's what can go to any battlefield or to the combined life pool, equal to the total number of cards in all the rubble piles across all the players. Again, another scaling mechanism there. As to the counters, the tentacle counters here can go into a given battlefield. Essentially, it's like his tentacles reaching out, causing the rubble, all that kind of stuff, kind of physically tearing apart the world around you and everything. But one of these tentacle tokens, get that glaring one off of there, basically sits in a battlefield, and whenever there would be any kind of damage dealt at that battlefield to a minion or to the monolith that's there, even if it's critical, although you do still get the critical effect that we'll see in a moment if it happens to be a critical hit on the monolith, you basically just remove a tentacle. It doesn't actually deal damage to a minion or to the monolith at all. They're essentially shield tokens. The other ones, those Shadow Fiend tokens, can be placed onto minions, onto some of the enemy minions that are out there. Just one per minion, because you only need one. But essentially, it's like the spirits, these Shadow Fiend spirits from Zcerneboch, possess that minion and give them exceptional speed. So when you go to the battle phase, where normally you'll be going back and forth when it comes to who's attacking, all the Shadow Fiend infested ones get to go first, and then it starts alternating. On the plus side, I guess, no special loss conditions. As for the deck, again, we'll look at these later. It's just the action here, or the condition that matters for now, and this is a mixture, though mostly actions. So we have 2 copies of Whiplash, 2 of Driven by Darkness, 2 of Possessed by Darkness, 2 of Dangerous Terrain, 2 of Crumbling Ground. Notice there, receive a rubble, so it can happen otherwise. 2 of King of Night. Then we have individual cards for Breed of Night, Monstrous Presence, Rampant Destruction, Unstoppable Force, Zcerneboch's Resolve, Recuperate, Regeneration, and then our conditions, as I straighten this out just a little bit here for you, we have Rapid Hybridization, Falling Ashes, Entrapped in Ruins, and Touched by Night. Let me correct that real quick. There's actually 2 copies of Breed of the Night. I wound up getting it mixed up into the Hypnos deck by accident. Notice these are what are putting out those Shadow Fiend counters, for example, or Tentacle counters. Then we have Hypnos, who is, as the rulebook calls it, the one with the highest complexity, because holy crap, this one is complex compared to the other ones. You have the card with the rules summary and the different ongoing abilities listed. There is the symbol for Hypnos. They use the 17 dream counters here. We'll talk more about how these work here in just a moment, because we need to explain these cards first. We have Rift cards, same on front and back, where you have the Mortal Realm and the Dreamlands represented on either side of the Rift card. We'll see how that works in just a moment. And then even though the rulebook shows a standard Nemesis back on these cards, instead it's Hypnos on the back, and these are what are referred to as trauma cards. It only makes sense to talk about those as we talk about how this one actually plays. So, first off, at the beginning of the game, each player is going to take the top 3 cards of their Grimoire and sit it into what's referred to as the Void for them. Each player has their own Void. They are face-up piles. Anytime you are instructed to banish a card, you take the top card of your Grimoire and stick it in your Void stack. They are effectively out of the game unless they are somehow brought back in, or at least they're out of play. There are abilities that'll let you reclaim cards, which means you take one from the Void, you get to pick which one, and then shuffle it back into your Grimoire. That means you are constantly sort of leaking cards throughout the game, and if you ever get to a point where you need to get cards from your Grimoire and there's not enough, like you have to draw a card, or look at the top 3 cards, or search your Grimoire, but it's already empty. You have to take a trauma card, and then you take your graveyard and shuffle it to get a new Grimoire. And it's kind of a 3 strikes, you're dead kind of thing. You can have 2 traumas, that's fine. As soon as one player, that same player, would take their 3rd trauma everybody loses. Not the third across all the players, the third for a single player. Kind of like corruptions in Return to Dark Tower. Everybody loses if one player is knocked out by gaining too much of a bad thing. Also, bear in mind that when that happens, when you have to take the trauma and you get to shuffle your graveyard to get a new Grimoire, all the cards that are already in your void are just gone. They are completely removed from the game at that point. There is no way to reclaim them anymore. And yes, the effects do suck. So we have Unbearable Revelations. Whenever you meditate, take 4 direct damage, unless you draw 1 fewer card. Again, meditate is just the name of the action where you draw 2 cards, kind of the standard action. It's printed on the player boards. Paranoia, Lobotomy, Hypnotizing Visions, Haunting Voices, and Amnesia. This almost reminds me of like an Arkham Horror kind of thing. Whenever you play a sorcery, you take 4 direct damage, kind of like when you use spells in Arkham and there's an effect on you that's kind of paying the price of doing the spell. But you have 6 of these that could theoretically come into play. Why 6? Because, of course, if it's 3 players, each could take up to 2, but then as soon as any player gets 1 more, game's over anyway. You don't ever need more than 6. As for these rift cards, when you lay out your 3 battlefields, you will place a rift on the player side of that battlefield. And then on either side of this, that's where you'll be playing minions, either to the Mortal Realm or to the Dreamlands, not both. Although you can use a reinforce action, it would normally let you move between battlefields to move from Dreamland to Mortal Realm or Mortal Realm to Dreamland, and you could do a swap as you would typically do if you were doing regular reinforce and whatnot here. But the idea is that in the Mortal Realm, they basically act like normal. In the Dreamlands, they can't actually attack anything necessarily, but when you would deal damage as if you were attacking, that lets you reclaim 1 card from your void per damage. So it's important to be in the Dreamlands to get your cards back so your Grimoire doesn't completely get torn away from you into the void. And if you resolve a critical hit as part of that, yes, you're reclaiming a card. You also get the critical hit effect that you would normally get for hitting a monolith, which again, we will talk about when we talk about battling monoliths and all that kind of stuff here in just a moment. So this is kind of an important aspect of managing the battlefield. There's Mortal Realm and Dreamlands you got to contend with. And then there are certain effects that'll put these dream counters onto enemy minions. And basically, if an enemy minion that has one of those counters on it attacks, then before doing any of its tactics, you count up the number of dream counters on that minion, and then the players have to choose either to banish a card that many times from the top of an allied Grimoire, doesn't matter which player, or put a damage counter on an allied minion who's in the Dreamlands of that location. Normally, minions that are in Dreamlands can't take regular damage at all. Only by, some abilities and things like that. But that particular situation does allow them to get hurt while they're in the Dreamlands. For what it's worth, enemy minions never go to the Dreamlands. They are always in the Mortal Realm. And your avatars won't ever go to the Dreamlands either. It's just your minions that are out there. And of course, the attachments that might be on them. And of course, Hypnos has a Nemesis deck here. We have 2 copies of Shifting Realities, 2 of Sleep Paralysis, 2 of Possessed by Hypnos, 2 of Crippling Delusions, 2 of Consuming Anxiety, which I am feeling as these things are about to slip out of my hand, 2 of Dreamwalker, 2 of Paralyzing Nausea. Then we have 1 each of Rift Pulse, Rift Storm, Call of the Rift, Shattered Dreams, reminds me of the song, Malaise of Madness, Narcolepsy, and then we're into conditions. Those were all actions. We have, these things are really trying to escape from me here. I got these sleeves specifically because you're not supposed to slip around as much. Notice here, some of these ongoing abilities have this little meeple symbol now. Basically, when one of these comes out, it is a condition. You can pay to get rid of it, but it's actually affecting the specific individual player rather than affecting everyone or being some kind of broad effect. But I would say that even though it is affecting just the player whose turn it was or whose action it was or whatever it was that got this drawn and wound up going to them, anybody can pay that cost to get rid of it on that person's behalf. It doesn't have to be that player. But we have Recurring Nightmares, Shattered Mind, Twisted Visions, and Touch of Despair, which I guess means a touch causing despair, not you just have a touch of despair. Not much. So yeah, definitely a significantly more complex Nemesis than the others. So much so, I would say, that there's a different setup diagram entirely for that one. This is Erlik Khan here, with the Deathdealer leading the invasion, kind of the starting point, you might say, the suggested first play scenario. And you notice here, so you got your 3 different battlefield locations. You have an Endbringer across 2 of them. You have an avatar somewhere. This is a solo setup here. You have the player's area along with that counter for the allied defense. Then the players have their side of the battlefield. Then there is the Endbringer side of the battlefield and all their various decks and whatnot. Hypnos gets this diagram. So all the stuff up here, including the trauma deck, again, with that wrong card back on it. The Mortal Realm, always for their side. But then notice here on the player side, there's those Rift cards, Mortal Realm and Dreamlands on either side for each of the 3 locations. Just in case that makes it a little bit clearer what I'm describing. It even notes the starting of the Void with those 3 cards to begin with. And if you've been wondering just where the heck those minions are that we've been talking about, they actually come from the Archetype deck. So there are 4 archetypes, again, in the game, just as there are 4 Nemeses, and this is the first of them, the Deathdealer. Now, rather than giving you the counts as I'm flipping through the deck, I'll just grab one of each to show you. It's just a little bit easier to manage holding all these sleeved cards here. We have 12 copies of Rotting Follower, 4 each of Menacing Dead, Dread Shrieker, and Curse Bearer, then 2 of King of the Cursed, and then 1 of the Legend minion, Death. Now, before we even look at the actual large card here, let's look at those specific minions. Set up like any other minions here, right? Cost, attack value, essence value, stuff at the bottom here, either an ability or if there's no ability, some flavor text. The symbol there, that's a Deathdealer symbol. And the backs are essentially just the standard Grimoire card backs here, so they go into those official sleeves if you have them. The Rotting Follower has 3 attack. We'll talk in a minute about how that actually works with attacks. And then we have 1 essence and a 1 cost for when referenced, which actually start the game by putting 1 Rotting Follower per player into the discard pile for this deck, the Archetype discard pile. The Nemesis and Archetype decks for your Endbringer do not get shuffled together. They are separate decks, each with their own discard piles. And you're going to place 1 of these also per player into each battlefield to start with. And then the rest just gets shuffled into the Archetype deck. So that's sort of like the one you're going to see the most, or the generic one there. We have the Menacing Dead. Ongoing, this minion gets +1 attack for each other enemy Wraith minion, like Rotting Follower. Then Dread Shrieker, when played, spawn a minion. Its when played effects do not trigger. More about spawning in a second. Curse Bearer, when played, take damage equal to the number of enemy Wraith minions, including this one. King of the Cursed, when played, destroy an allied minion. If you cannot, take 3 damage. Notice, in that battlefield for most of these. And then Ongoing for Death. At the end of each round, each player picks 1 of their minions. Destroy them. So there's a lot of changes related to minions and whatnot for the Endbringer that you're playing against. Even before we look at this, because that's going to have to do with actually during the battle, during the tactics phase. So the way this is going to work, essentially, is there's now an extra phase that's actually before the ready phase. During this spawn phase, what you're going to do is spawn a number of cards off of the Archetype deck per player into each battlefield that the Endbringer is in, that the Nemesis is in. So if the Nemesis is in the left and center, and there are 2 players, it's 2 to the left, and then 2 to the center. It always starts left and moves right, and you always spawn them into one battlefield completely before spawning them into the next battlefield. But since it's 2 players, it's 2 per battlefield, another scaling mechanism. During the battle phase, you're going to be fighting against them and trying to take out the monoliths that we'll see after we look at these in the scenarios. And just like in a regular PvP game, where which player gets to activate a minion first as they alternate depends on which battlefield it is, same thing happens here. In this case, an enemy minion is going to attack first in each of the 2 battlefields where the Endbringer's avatar is located, and then an allied minion attacks first in the other battlefield. So basically, you will never attack first as a player in the center battlefield. and it goes back and forth. Because it's cooperative, basically, when it's the allied minion's turn, you can pick any ready allied minion on the battlefield. Doesn't necessarily have to be for a particular player. The dice are rolled like normal. The player who owns that particular minion can use any tactics, and any player can use omens or their fate counter to re-roll battle dice. And just like in PvP, where critical hits get assigned by the attacker, but all other damage from regular hits gets assigned by the defender, who would typically spread those out so as not to lose minions so they can go out and attack and everything. There's sort of the same sort of chain of damage application here as well. So for each regular point of battle damage that needs to be assigned, you go to the first available option of these three. First, an enemy minion in that battlefield where it's not going to destroy that minion, attacker's choice, to a monolith in the battlefield, or then to any enemy minion in the battlefield which would destroy it. So basically, they're going to absorb the hits on their minions without destroying them before allowing you to deal damage to the monolith, which is what you're trying to take out, 9 health each. You destroy all the ones that are out there, you win the game. And if the monolith is already out of there, then yeah, you can keep spreading out that damage to wipe out the minions that are left. On the other hand, a critical hit, since just like in regular PvP, you as the attacker are choosing where to place that, you could put that immediately onto whatever minion you want, even if it destroys it, or more importantly, put it on a monolith. And that is actually where another of those functions of the Nemesis cards come from. The bottom section under the symbol, ignore all this stuff, the bottom section is typically beneficial. And you get this, it's, again, typically beneficial, not always. You get this when you deal a critical hit on a monolith. So you deal the critical hit, you draw one of these from the Nemesis deck, look at the bottom, and do whatever it says. Like you may draw 3 cards. If you do, discard a card. That's why I kept mentioning those weird situations where it might be an oddball scenario, where you might have a critical hit done in some other way, and when you would and would not still get those effects. That's the effect I'm talking about, the bottom of the Nemesis card that you would draw upon dealing that critical hit to a monolith, or whatever that situation might have called for. I would note, by the way, as far as dealing out that damage, if there's no monoliths left in that battlefield, you can just assign the damage however you like, even if it destroys the minion before you've got other ones down to like 1 health. That's fine. Now, when the enemy attacks, when one of these minions would attack you, the ready minion with the highest cost will attack first. So in this case, it would be Death if they were all out there. If they're tied, then you go with the one with the least essence left. So basically, so it can get in a hit before it dies. So like if we had a Curse Bearer and a Dread Shrieker both out there, both start at 2 health, but maybe one of them already has 1 damage on it. Say the Dread Shrieker has 1 essence left, Curse Bearer has 2, even though they're the same cost. Dread Shrieker would go first because it has less essence, trying to get a hit in before it gets destroyed. And then if that's happening in one of the 2 battlefields that the avatar for the Endbringer is in, the Nemesis is in, that's where you get the 3rd application of these Nemesis cards. You would draw a card during the tactics phase, and you would look at the symbol and the color. There's blue, green, red, and white. Notice, though, for those who are colorblind, there are symbols, not just colors here. And that is where the large card for your archetype comes in. Symbols down here. It's very familiar if you've ever played, to some degree, solo or cooperative Star Realms, but especially if you ever played the campaign stuff for Hero Realms, where you're drawing cards and comparing colors to a big card. Same kind of deal. What tactic happens depends on which color is drawn. Now, before we completely leave the idea of Nemesis cards, let me note one other mechanism. The Nemesis doesn't have a hand of cards. So sometimes you may be in a situation where you are supposed to force them to discard a card, but they have no hand to do that. So instead, what you would do is put a damage counter on top of the Nemesis deck. And the next time they would need to draw a card, either for an action or to figure out the tactic to use in a battle, you would simply remove the damage counter and not actually draw a card. On the other hand, if you were doing it for the critical hit, which is beneficial to you, you just move the damage counter, take the card to do the critical hit, discard it, and then put the damage counters back on top. So it's keeping them from being able to play something because theoretically their invisible hand is now missing a card. Now I mention that here, aside from just getting us done with the Nemesis deck, to also be able to mention that 4th, rather rare use of these cards. So if they were to have to discard a card, right, you just stick the damage counter on top of the Nemesis deck. However, sometimes there are abilities that are like, force them to discard a card. If it's this type of card, gain some benefit, or whatever. So you still need to know what type of card was discarded, but they don't have minions and attachments and stuff in their Nemesis deck. They just have actions and conditions. So what you would do is you would still be placing that token on it so they can't draw the next time they need to draw one, but you would still pull a card and check the symbol. If it's white or red, treat it as if they discarded a minion. If it's green, treat it as if they discarded an attachment. If it's blue, treat it as if they discarded a sorcery. So even though they don't have those card types in their Nemesis deck, you can still use those abilities. So actions or conditions, and 4 uses. Action, critical hit, tactic during battle, and possibly also being used to determine card type for certain discard abilities. One last thing to note, since we're talking about all these different rules and such for battles, is that there is no dice rolling at all for the enemy minions. They just deal the damage that's listed, period. So it's not he rolls 2 dice, it's he hits for 2. I would note, though, there's a little bit more mitigation in the game that I didn't mention earlier, which is that you can flip your fate counter at any time, not just to have a forced reroll of all the dice, but you can also use that to negate a Nemesis deck draw and force the drawing of a different card if you didn't like the effect, which might be very helpful if you have a particular tactic you're trying to avoid in the middle of a battle, for example. Anyway, we've talked enough about that. We've talked about Deathdealer. Let's move on to our next archetype. Then our second archetype is the Demiurge, who is all about trying to evolve these creepy minions that they have. Notice lots of new tokens here, a rule card. Still medium complexity, though, according to the rulebook here. So in this case, the last archetype had 27 cards in its deck. Here there's only 23. You have 9 copies of Faceless Horror, 5 of Faceless Reject, 4 of Faceless Ambusher, 3 of Soulless One, and then 1 of the legendary minion Rebirth. The setup is always going to tell you which minions start out on the battlefield, and in this case you're going to put 1 Faceless Horror per player into each battlefield and then shuffle the rest into the archetype deck. And what's going to happen is throughout the gameplay, you have your Demiurge card here, so you have your different tactics that could come into play by drawing that symbol, right? Anytime a minion is attacking that is in the same location as one of the 2 locations where the Endbringer is located, you're going to do a tactic and whatnot. Some of these say evolve, as we'll see here in just a moment. There's also in this ongoing ability up here, there's actually a new lose condition here. There's a symbol, the little butterfly. But as you're playing, whether it's through these tactics or something else, you can have evolution happen, essentially. And there are 6 different evolve token types, 5 of each for a total of 30. They say to put them in a face-down pile, but in the copy that at least came with the Kickstarter, they actually include a little black bag to stick them all into, so you can just randomly draw them, very Arkham Horror-esque. But an evolve token can go onto a minion, and it gets some new ability. Now, the thing here is there's kind of a way they can disappear on their own, and there's also kind of the danger of having too many. So if they ever were to get an evolve token that is the same as one they already have, both of them are gone. You just remove the tokens. If one is ever defeated, all the tokens get discarded that way as well. Just back to the pool. But if at any point you have minions on the table that have 3 or more evolve counters, and the number of minions who are in that state are equal to the number of players plus 2, so 3 for a 1-player game, 4 for a 2-player game, 5 for a 3-player game, the players automatically lose the game. So there is another loss condition built in to this one, as noted there in the ongoing ability. And then there is a little help card here, an evolve reference, that says devolve if a minion would gain a duplicate evolve counter, instead return both evolve counters to the evolve counter pool. As I mentioned, you do not replace them. There's the 6 different types, and what will happen here, you'll notice here that you have some of these that are tactics and some that are ongoing abilities. We'll talk about each one in turn here. And it does note that whenever an evolve counter is gained during an attack, its tactic triggers immediately. You do not wait until the next round. It does come into play then. This is double-sided with the same information. So let's look at these minions. I already did the counts. Let's look at the minions, and then we'll look at what the tokens do. So we have the Faceless Horror, a newborn here. They're basically all newborns except for the Horseman. For what it's worth, there's a Horseman for each of these. Death was a Horseman, the Legend minion. So you have Faceless Horror, 2 and 2, cost of 1. Faceless Reject, 3 and 3, cost of 2. Notice none of them have any abilities here because that's all coming from the Evolve tokens. Faceless Ambusher, 4 and 4, cost of 3. Soulless one, 5 and 5, cost of 4. And then Rebirth, one of the Horsemen, here, 5 and 5, cost of 6. Legend, ongoing at the end of each round, evolve each enemy minion, including this one. You really don't want this out there. Kill it. So what do the tokens do? Well, they all, by the way, have this little symbol on the back, the little evolve counter symbol. This is not a question mark, that is a tentacle. This provides a new tactic, not specific to a battlefield or anything, where an allied player with one or more cards in their hand has to randomly discard a card, like the tentacle's reaching out and snatching it. These are claws. So claws, it's also a tactic. The attacking minion gets +2 attack. Then fangs, also a tactic for a specific battlefield in this case, where you deal 1 damage to an allied minion and heal 1 damage from the attacking minion, so it's almost like a vampiric type of thing. So many vampires! Cunning is another tactic that causes you to resolve an additional archetype tactic, which is, again, these, where you draw the Nemesis card, look at the color or symbol, and match it to here for that to happen. This is a tail, an ongoing ability for a given battlefield. Whenever an allied minion attacks, weaken it. And then Wings, which is an ongoing ability. This minion's attack deals direct damage. So it can't go on minions, it must hit that life pool on the allied defense counter, the little dial I showed you. Now, it's a lot of different tactics, so the order this actually resolves in is laid out in the rulebook. You're going to resolve the non-counter-based tactics, so the ones not related to this, first. Then any of these that are cunning-related, and then any that aren't cunning. So basically, do this, and then if there's a cunning one that's going to let you do another one of these, do that, then deal with the other ones that are tactics. Pretty freaking complex, and this is only the second out of 4. Our third archetype here is the Plaguebringer, considered high complexity. And what you'll find here is he has a special set of tokens here that we're going to take a look at. 15 of these Plague Rats / Pestilence Swarm tokens. And then we have the big card here, ongoing ability, which has to do with those tokens there, plus the different tactics for the different colors. Unsurprisingly, you've got that rat symbol there as the symbol for the Plaguebringer. And then as far as the various minions and whatnot here, we have a grand total of 9 copies of Decaying Shredder. Ironic, I guess, because it says Shredder, right? Shredder was the enemy of the rat splinter, and yeah, anyway. This is another case where you're going to put one of those into each battlefield per player to start with, and then whatever ones are left, you shuffle into the archetype deck. Then there's 1 copy there of Pestilence, the Horseman, the Legend minion, and then we have 3 copies each of Bubonic Runner and Pied Piper and Plague Spreader, and then 2 copies each of Broodmother and Blight Shaman. So let's take a look at the minions, and then we'll take a look at those token cards. So again, we have Decaying Shredder with a tactic there. Deals with the Plague Rats tokens. Bubonic Runner, Pestilent Swarm tokens. These are the same tokens, just different sides, doing different things. Pied Piper, same thing with Pestilent Swarm tokens. Plague Spreader, same thing again. Broodmother, again. They're all playing off that same mechanism with the exception of Blight Shaman here. And the ongoing is that other enemy rat minions get +1 attack, and that basically just means any rats, not necessarily the ones that are tokens. But the tokens are considered minions. They're called token minions, so they would also be rat minions here. And then we've got, again, playing off of the Pestilence Swarm in this case. We have Pestilence here with the ongoing that at the end of each round you take global damage equal to the number of enemy Pestilence Swarm tokens. Yikes. So what are we dealing with when it comes to these tokens that pretty much all these cards are doing something with? Well, again, there are 15 copies of these. Okay, so they start out, if a Pestilence Swarm needs to be spawned, what they're going to do, what the Nemesis is going to do, is take one of these off the pile. Notice it's a cost of 0. It is an attachment there, a curse attachment, for -1 attack with 0 health specific to this or anything. It's going to go onto one of the allied minions. If it's at a particular location, then the allied minion at that location, and so on. Ongoing ability at the end of each round, weaken the attached minion, like they're gnawing away at it. Then if it has 0 or less attack, destroy it, based on this. Also ongoing, when the attached minion is destroyed or leaves play, flip this card. So, if your minion that had a pestilence swarm gnawing away at it is eventually killed, you flip it, and it goes to the other side, to the enemy side of the play area. Now it is still cost 0, attack value of 1, essence of 1. Ongoing, all play rat tokens attack together, sum their attack values. For the purpose of tactics and other effects, this group counts as a single attacking minion. This ability cannot be blanked. In other words, say there's 5 of these out there on a particular battlefield on the enemy side, then after all the other minions have done their attacks, they're all exhausted now, the plague rats are going to attack last. And when they attack, basically you add them all together and treat it as if it's one giant swarm with attack values that are basically the sum total rather than just one at a time. But if something were to happen sort of in the middle of dealing damage or once the attack's already happening that somehow brings another one of these out there, then basically they kind of form like a second clump or a second swarm, and then they would attack together after that. But notice they only attack together with that combination there. They are still considered an essence of 1 individually to actually kill them. Then the last, at low complexity, just like the Deathdealer, is the Hellraiser, though not to be confused, of course, with, the films of the same name. In this case, I've had to use a little bit of a different layout here, if you're familiar with the layout I've used for the last couple of these here. But we have the Hellraiser's big card here. There's the symbol in the corner. Ongoing, dealing with tokens and such here, and the various tactics. Generally speaking, if you pause and look at all the tactics for any of these, they're going to deal with whatever that special mechanism tends to be for that particular archetype here. So this time we have 9 copies of Inferno Tyrant. We have 2 copies each of Lord of Slaughter, Rampaging Piercer, the Butcher, and Hellflame Warden, and then 1 copy each of Essence Harvester and Fireborn Champion. That's not a token, I just had to put it up there just to get everything on the screen here. As you might expect by the number of cards, that Inferno Tyrant, that's the one where we're going to put 1 per player into each battlefield at the beginning, which is kind of that standard setup thing again, and then any that are left, surprise, surprise, they go into the Archetype deck. Let's look at them. So you're going to note that these deal a lot with omens here. So we have the Inferno Tyrant that I mentioned before, cost of 3, attack of 2, essence of 5, which is pretty strong for this starting enemy here. The ongoing ability at the start of battle in that battlefield, put 2 omens on this minion. Lord of Slaughter, another one, put 1 omen on this minion. At the end of each round, flip 1 damage counter on each enemy minion, including this one. That is another aspect there, flipping of damage/omen tokens. And then continuing on, you can pause to see the abilities if you like. We have Rampaging Piercer here. The Butcher, still all these, putting omens on stuff or flipping them. Hellflame Warden, Essence Harvester, Fireborn Champion, and then our Horseman, which is War, with the ongoing, at the end of each round, flip 1 damage counter on each enemy minion. Take direct damage equal to the number of counters flipped this way. So this is when we're explaining this special mechanism probably makes the most sense in looking at that larger card in a little more detail. So you may recall that in the base game for PvP and for every mode, you have these omen tokens, which typically you get by playing a minion that has a little token, or perhaps a sorcerer that has a little token up in the corner. You get 1 per round anyway, but then there's damage counters on the back of these. So it uses these as a specialized token for the Hellraiser. So some of those abilities, as you saw, will put omen tokens this side up onto a given minion. And then the tactic, because remember, when there is a battle taking place, tactics are one of the steps of battle. And in this case, it'll be where you flip that card from the Nemesis stack, the Nemesis deck, look at the color symbol, and it's over here as long as the battle is taking place in one of the 2 locations where the Endbringer is located. And those abilities, kind of indicating the colors there, are going to do something with those, mostly by flipping them over. So specifically, okay, A blue tactic, flip all omens on the attacking minion. It gets +2 attack for each counter flipped this way. Green, flip all omens on the attacking minion. Take direct damage equal to the number of counters flipped this way. Red, flip all omens on the attacking minion. Take global damage equal to 3 times the number of counters flipped this way. Or white, flip an omen on the attacking minion. Take 1 global damage. Right? And the idea is that basically they flip over from being omens into being damage on that minion. And if it is enough to actually kill that minion, it deals that damaging effect first, and then it dies. But if the minion does live through taking that damage to get that powerful effect, one of the damage on the minion is flipped over to the omen side after the attack. So kind of a very minor amount of healing. So they take this sort of sacrificial damage, they get a little bit back if they manage to survive, but in the process of taking all that damage as sort of a sacrifice, a pain price, so to speak, those powerful abilities nail you. And notice it's different types, right? You've got different attack values for the minion, or you might have global damage, you might have direct damage, and so on. But I think kind of a creative use of tokens we already had. So we've got 4 Nemeses: Ereshkigal, Erlik, Hypnos, Zcerneboch. Each one with a deck of 25 Nemesis cards minus the 1 extra for Ereshkigal, the oversized card, and various, tokens and whatnot that they'll use along with their avatar that fits in 2 battlefields. Then your Archetype decks with their oversized cards, sometimes token cards, sometimes not, and varying sizes to their Archetype decks. Deathdealer had 27 cards, Demiurge had 23, Grimoire also had 23, and then Hellraiser had 20. Then we get to the scenarios, which actually don't have any cards at all. There's just 4 of them. And again, playing with a scenario is optional. You will always use a Nemesis. You will always use an Archetype. But you can either play with one of the 4 scenarios or no scenario at all. It'll change your setup and quite a bit actually about the game itself for it just being 1 oversized card. We'll see how this impacts setup here in a moment, because that all ties into the Monoliths, where we'll also be looking at difficulty settings. So this is an example here. This is our first one. This is the most simplistic, low complexity one of the scenarios, actually suggested to be your first one when you start playing with scenarios. Again, they are optional. Is leading the invasion. So we have these different markers here indicating certain rounds and something that's going to happen. When you start the game, you put a little red counter token like you would use to track the damage on a battlefield in PvP and stick it on top of a little round marker. At the end of whatever round is numbered there, whatever it is will take effect. Basically, it is the last step in the end of round phase, and whenever it happens, you then move the counter down to the next one. At the end of the next round, or corresponding numerical round, the same thing happens over and over again. So in the case of is leading the invasion, round 1, no effect. Round 2, spawn a minion into each battlefield with no enemy minions. Round 3, take global damage equal to the number of enemy minions. Round 4, spawn a minion into each battlefield. Round 5, take direct damage equal to 3 times the number of enemy minions. And notice here, round 6, at the end of round 6, players lose the game. These typically apply some type of new win or lose condition or a timer on the game itself. Whereas playing without a scenario, no timer, though you may have different win-loss conditions based on some of the stuff we've seen already. The next is Awakening the Scions. This one's interesting because you will never play with monoliths at all with this one, so it completely changes how you can try to win. It also alters the way battle works to a degree here. Okay? So the ongoing thing here is that at the start of each round, including the first, you'll spawn a minion into each of the 2 battlefields that the Endbringer avatar is in. That is in addition to what already happens, which is essentially the same thing. Then ongoing, players can only re-roll each die once using omens. Okay. This one is a very fast game, relatively speaking, because there's only 3 possible rounds. At the end of round 1, Awaken. For each player, the Endbringer takes an action against them from the Nemesis deck, as usual. Round 2, at the end, take direct damage equal to 5 times the number of players. Holy crap. Round 3, also Awaken. Take direct damage equal to 5 times the number of players. Then if players have not been defeated yet, they win the game. There's also some extra mechanisms in the rulebook for this one. Basically, you don't do like the regular damage assignment because you wouldn't be going for, minions, but don't kill them, and then put it on the monolith, which doesn't exist in this scenario. Then put it on minions that could kill them. Instead, you just put them onto minions, but you have to go from highest to lowest cost. And if it's a critical hit, you don't actually get a critical hit effect from the bottom of a Nemesis card that gets drawn. Instead, whenever a critical hit is dealt, regardless of what it's dealt to, you restore one of your allied defense. So it's slamming you for damage, but you're able, as you're assigning critical hits, to keep sort of slowly healing, but not really fast enough. Then you have another kind of odd one here with an alternate loss condition. It's preparing a dark ritual. So you'll start out with prepare the ritual, as we will see here in just a moment. So we have ongoing when the number of minions on the sacrificial altar, what is that? We'll see in a second, is equal to or greater than 8 times the number of players, players lose the game. So either 8, 16, or 24, obviously there. At the end of round 1, you have prepare the ritual. Now, technically, you sort of already set up the sacrificial altar, at least, maybe not preparing the ritual, by taking the first card from the Archetype deck and just flipping it face up into a pile to create the sacrificial altar during setup. And at the end of round 1, prepare the ritual, put the top card of the Archetype deck face up onto the sacrificial altar. Then destroy each non-token enemy minion, put all of those minions face up into the sacrificial altar, and spawn a new minion for each minion destroyed this way. Their when-played effects do not trigger. And that's going to happen at the end of rounds 2 and 3, basically, piling up. And aside from this loss condition, if it gets to the end of round 4 and you still haven't won, players lose the game. So 2 new loss conditions with that one. And it gets a little bit worse because at the end of each battle, you're going to roll an 8-sided die for each minion in that battlefield, both the allied ones and the enemy ones. And on a roll of an 8, the minion gets destroyed. But you can spend an omen to re-roll as many times as you like. And you can also discard 3 cards from your hand to change a die result to an 8 or to a 1. So you can kind of control it a little bit. But I would note that anything that just like destroys a minion doesn't put it onto the sacrificial altar. The sacrificial altar only fills because of these effects here. Destroyed is just destroyed, like usual. Then we have the last one here, which is arming the horde. Note that aside from leading the invasion, which is low complexity, they're all considered medium complexity. So, ongoing, each minion gets +1 attack and +1 essence for each arms card on it. So an arms card would be one of your cards or an allied player's card that is then added as an attachment to a minion face down, which then gives it +1 attack and +1 essence for each of those cards. There's also a new special player tactic. So in the tactics part of the battle phase, you could spend 3 omens to deal a critical hit. That's regardless of what you're going to roll. It's just spend 3, get a critical hit. So, end of round 1, you will arm the horde. For each non-token enemy minion, each player attaches the top card of their Grimoire to that minion as a face-down arms card. Round 2, take direct damage equal to the number of arms cards. Round 3, same thing. Round 4, even worse, take direct damage equal to 2 times the number of arms cards, and then another loss condition. Round 5, players lose the game. So as you can see, the scenarios lead to a significantly tougher game. But that is where the ability to not play with them and to adjust the difficulty come in. So it's finally time to look at the last set of components for Endbringer, which is the monoliths. And here we have our 45 different monolith cards. We're going to go through how setup works in relation to the monolith cards and essentially what they do. But remember that except in scenarios that don't use monoliths at all, typically the goal of the players is to destroy the monoliths. And the way that it will work in setup is you will always start with 9 monolith cards of some particular varieties. Even if you're playing with just one player, you'll always start with 9. And those 9 will then be dealt out to the individual battlefields to get the number that is required. So if you're playing with one player, it's 1 per battlefield. If you're playing with 2 players, it's 2 per battlefield. With 3 players, it's 3 per battlefield. Which means, since you always start with those 9 that are all shuffled together, in a 2-player or a 1-player game, you're only going to see some of the possible monoliths that could come out from those initial 9. If you're playing with 3 players, you know which ones they are because you know what those 9 monolith cards were, but you don't necessarily know where they are or what order they go in. When they are out at a location, the back is showing, and it shows their health value here of 9. And you're able to deal damage to them, and when they are destroyed, the idea is that you then flip it over, and there will be a when revealed effect down at the bottom that will take place. And you'll keep doing that to each monolith to eventually destroy all of them to try to win. Which ones you use depends completely on which difficulty setting you're going to try to play on. So, a normal game will use this deck called the Blackstone Shard Monoliths. They all say Blackstone, they all say Blackstone Shard, but they have different abilities. So the 9 things that could happen when you defeat a Blackstone Shard monolith would be, when revealed, you may choose 1, restore up to 5 allied defense, or exhaust a battlefield, or distribute 2 damage among enemy minions. Choose 1, play a minion from your hand with its cost lowered by 1, or gain 2 omens, and you may draw a card. Choose 1, exhaust an enemy minion, or gain 2 energy. Choose 1, play a sorcery from your hand with its cost lowered by 1, or gain 2 omens, and you may draw a card. Play an attachment from your hand with its cost lowered by 1, or gain 2 energy. You may reinforce an allied avatar. Choose 1, gain 3 omens, or refill your fate counter. Restore up to 5 allied defense, or you may search your grimoire, shuffle afterward for any card, and put it into your hand. Restore up to 5 allied defense, or heal up to 5 damage total from any number of allied minions. Restore up to 5 allied defense, or ready an allied non-legend minion, or ready a domain skill card. So notice all of those offer you choices, and all of them are beneficial. You've destroyed a monolith, congratulations, you're getting rewarded. So on normal difficulty, those are the only 9 you're going to look at. You're going to ignore all the other ones out here on the table. Those are the only 9 you will ever potentially play against. When you are playing normal difficulty, they will always be beneficial to take them out. If you're playing beginner mode, you're also using these Blackstone Shard monoliths, but along with that, they recommend not playing with a scenario, which in this case would not impact which monoliths you're playing with as it would on higher difficulties. But also remember how I said that when a Nemesis is supposed to discard a card when they don't have a hand, you instead are going to put a damage counter on top of the Nemesis deck, so the next time they're supposed to draw a card for any reason from that deck, basically it gets skipped and you just remove the damage counter. The beginner difficulty also has you at the start of every single round, including the first, for each player in the game, put a damage counter on the Nemesis deck. Which basically means that the players are getting 6 actions and the Nemesis is only getting 5, typically. For veteran or hard, that's where the other ones come in here. So the idea is that there's one set of components I didn't show you for any of the Nemesis archetypes or scenarios, and that is that every single one has their own set of 3 monolith cards. There's also this other monolith card called Shattered up there. So the idea would be, these are sort of your regular cards for monoliths, but they're only used on veteran or hard difficulty. So during setup, once you choose your Nemesis, you take their 3 and put them aside to be monoliths for the game. Once you pick your archetype, you do the same. If you're playing with a scenario, you do the same. If you're not playing with a scenario, you use the 3 Shattered monolith cards instead, hence why they're all kind of lined up here together as another group of 4. And then you're going to shuffle all of those together, and then you're going to lay them out. Again, 1 per battlefield per player. Now those Shattered monoliths, they have no effect, so it's not beneficial, but it also doesn't hurt. All the other ones, they hurt. Every freaking one of them. So for arming the Horde, take direct damage equal to the number of arms cards on enemy minions. An allied player attaches the top 3 cards of their grimoire face down among enemy minions as arms cards. Distribute damage among allied minions equal to the number of arms cards on enemy minions. For leading the invasion, exhaust and weaken all allied minions. At least it's only in that battlefield. For each enemy minion, weaken an allied minion with essence 2 or greater. You may pick the same or different minions each time. And in each battlefield, take damage equal to 2 times the number of enemy minions in that battlefield. Then for preparing a dark ritual, we have each player puts the top card of their grimoire onto the sacrificial altar. Or, For each allied minion, roll an 8-sided die. Simultaneously destroy all minions whose results were 5 or greater. Not just, that 8 or 1 thing. Take global damage equal to the number of cards on the sacrificial altar. And remember the other scenario, Awakening the Scions, that one doesn't use monoliths at all, so obviously it wouldn't have its own set. It's the only one of those sort of a large card components for this that doesn't have its own. For Ereshkigal, search the Nemesis deck and discard pile for 1 cultist card per player and put them into the ritual chamber. Then shuffle the Nemesis discard pile into the Nemesis deck. Advance the gate 3 times. Take direct damage equal to the number of enemy cultists and open gates. For Erlik, take 6 direct damage. Take global damage equal to the number of rage counters on Erlik, or distribute 4 damage among allied minions. For Hypnos, each player banishes the top 4 cards of their Grimoire. Take direct damage equal to the number of minions banished this way, or destroy all allied minions in the Dreamlands, or put a dream counter on each enemy minion. Zcerneboch, each player receives 2 rubble. Take direct damage equal to the total amount of rubble in all rubble piles, or put 2 tentacle counters into each battlefield. So that's the Nemeses. Here's the archetypes, starting with Plaguebringer when revealed. Take direct damage equal to the number of enemy Pestilence Swarm and Plague Rats tokens. Spawn a Pestilence Swarm token into each battlefield, or spawn 3 Plague Rats tokens. Deathdealer, take global damage equal to the number of enemy minions. Spawn an Exhausted minion into each battlefield. Their when played effects do not trigger. At least there's that. Each player picks one of their minions. Destroy all other allied minions. Ouch. At least it's just the one battlefield, though. Demiurge, pick 2 enemy minions, or 1 if there is only 1. Evolve each of them, then evolve each of them again. Take direct damage equal to the number of evolved counters on enemy minions, and evolve each enemy minion. And then finally, the last of the archetypes here for Hellraiser. Heal 1 damage from each allied minion. That's good. Put 2 omens on each enemy minion that is in a battlefield where 1 or more allied minions were healed this way. Okay. Take damage in this battlefield equal to 2 times the number of enemy minions in all battlefields, or put an omen on each enemy minion. So you see how there's a pretty big difference here. All of these are doing some pretty nasty stuff. These are basically neutral, but in normal or beginner play, you're playing with monoliths that actually actively help you. That is actually the only difference between normal and veteran. Normal uses these, veteran uses these. The only difference between veteran and hard is that you may recall that during that spawn phase, you're going to spawn 1 card from the archetype deck per player into each of the 2 battlefields that the avatar of the Endbringer, the Nemesis, is basically straddling. Well, on hard, you do that normally, but then you also still spawn 1 per player in the battlefield where the Nemesis isn't. So you're basically doing 1 per player in all battlefields, which just means you're getting more and more minions out very quickly for the enemy. And they do suggest that you can further adjust the difficulty if you like by just deciding which of these you're going to use. It's just that if you're going to use them, they do have to match the current Nemesis archetype or scenario. So for example, in theory, if you wanted something that wasn't quite normal with the black stone shards, but also at the same time wasn't as hard as veteran, which is that next step up, maybe instead of using, say you're not playing with a scenario, instead of using like your Nemesis and your archetype and the shattered ones because you don't have a scenario, maybe you use the Nemesis, the shattered ones, and 3 black stone shards. The key is it's always starting out with 9, and you can't use one that doesn't match. Like, these are generic, they can match anything, but you couldn't, for instance, use Erlik's monoliths if you're playing with Ereshkigal, for example. So 80 different possible things that you could be up against, given the fact that you have 4 Nemeses, 4 archetypes, and 4 scenarios, but also the option of playing with no scenarios, so 4 times 4 times 5, plus 4 different regular difficulty levels that you can play around with, along with being able to then fine-tune if you wanted to by being a little more selective of your monoliths. Quite a bit of variability, but still a really difficult game regardless. I do want to make a note here about storage, by the way. So this is the original box, the core box for Sorcerer. You're going to have your rulebook, and this can fit 4 player boards, right? The 4 that come with it. And then you get your regular dice here. What I've done is I have put my other set of regular dice, my spare set, and the super large dice into this pool here, with the exception of one of them that I put over here with the little, the little clear, or quasi-clear, whatever you want to call them, the little tracker things, the red and blue trackers, the little red cubes and whatnot, and the 2 spare energy dice here. Put the other one where it's expected to be, there, kind of the way that it's spread out here. And then over on this side, we have the battlefields that come with the core box. So the 3 regular ones with no special abilities for London, and then the little underground hive in case you need it. Then I've got the tokens from the original game still separated out here. And then these little things, I'm probably going to change the color of this so it's a little more moody. I did find a black one of these. I've used like little containers to separate out tokens that are specific to, maybe individual characters and whatnot. The biggest thing about storage, though, is that we knew going into it that they said that if you wanted to actually store everything sleeved, you would need both boxes. It turns out that you really kind of need more than both boxes to an extent, or at least more than the card wells that are supposedly meant for holding cards. So this little well here is actually where typically you would keep your avatars for the characters. Because I'm going to be playing mostly solo and co-op, I need to keep both boxes handy anyway. So what I've done here is I have actually pulled out, with my clear sleeves, which are from GameGenic, in this case, clear matte sleeves. This is where I'm putting the token cards and some of these other special cards, like the individual monoliths, in case you're not playing with the black stone monoliths and whatnot here. I have all of those sleeved in clear sleeves because they are different backs or two-sided in different cases. Here in this well here, with little things here, you can use like little baggies or something to hold those oddball sets of tokens that aren't the main types. And then up here is where I'm keeping sleeved cards, and I'm able here to run through all of the characters, all of the lineages, and most of the domains. We'll see the other domains in the Endbringer box. One thing that I did do to separate these out, first off, I do have, as I mentioned, those nice dividers and such, but the game, of course, comes with its own dividers, right? The dividers that are meant to be used in that well, but as I talked about in the first video, they really don't fit well because this well tapers and the dividers did not taper at all. So they really didn't quite fit when you're trying to push them down in there. But I wanted to use them as sort of the headers heading into each section, for character, domain, lineage, and so on. We'll see with the Endbringer box as well. So what I actually wound up doing was I took these with a little paper cutter, and I just took a few millimeters off of each side to make it a bit more straight, a bit narrower as well. You can tell kind of where I did it by where this curve ends. If you want to emulate that, just take about the same amount off each side. And now it fits perfectly into the well to help divide off the sections of cards there. So this is kind of the setup that I have, at least right now, for the core box. And then this is the Endbringer box. So you got your Endbringer Rulebook. There is space in case you went out and bought another pair of player boards to bring it up to the maximum player count for PvP of 6 players. Remember the co-op and solo mode? Well, solo obviously is 1 player, but co-op only goes up to 3 players. So you do not need any extra boards if that's primarily how you're going to play. And then over here, the oversized cards for the Nemesis, the Archetype, the Scenario, and whatnot, just kind of over top of this where it actually has the indentation. Notice, though, it fits pretty much perfectly. You don't want to sleeve these. There's no way to do it, but it's not like you're shuffling them anyway. Various other tokens here, primarily from Endbringer itself. Over here, these tokens, and there is a round space underneath for your 8 tokens down there. Over here, again, did the same thing where I split or I cut the edges just a little bit on the dividers that come with it so it fit better. I'm actually using that one just kind of as a way of making sure that the cards themselves aren't hitting the edge of the well. They're hitting something more solid. But then here I've got the rest of my domains. I actually only had to put 2 domains sleeved using the official sleeves and the other cards like the tokens being sleeved in those GameGenic sleeves. I only had to actually move 2 of the domains from the core box over here to not have them really kind of squishing a bit. And then we have the Nemesis cards, the Archetype cards, and then in the back you've got the Monolith cards as well. At least the Monolith cards that aren't specific to the Nemesis archetype or scenario, those I have in that well with the tokens and whatnot in the original box. Then I just kind of empty stuff out here to show you this well. So we've got the tracker in that well, and then I have placed all of the avatars in a plastic baggie, put them in here. All of the stands for the avatars in a separate baggie just to make them easier to get to. I have decided to hang on to little packaging for the different decks and whatnot because I do like the notes, like how many cards of each type, like there's a token with this or whatever. So for now, at least I'm sticking them there. Eventually I'll get them out of there, but for now I'm sticking them in there. I do have those evolved tokens inside the little baggie, and that just gets dropped in there as well. And then I have the coastal and Egyptian battlefields just laying atop those because that's basically exactly the size for them. So yes, if you are playing and you have bought all the extra goodies and you have sleeved in the official sleeves and done some clear sleeves for the other stuff, you actually can fit it all across the two boxes, but I don't think it's fitting the way they meant it to fit. I think they meant for it all to fit within those two card wells and not have to pull anything out to be in that second well, but I don't know if they were expecting people to use their clear sleeves or what. I do not use their clear sleeves. I use the ones, as I mentioned, from GameGenic, so it could be that mine are thicker, but certainly the thickness can't be that much of a difference to really necessitate the way that I had to separate those cards out, even if I took out those cardboard dividers and just went with the plastic ones. So, you know, take it for what you will, but you can actually fit everything into the two boxes if you organize it properly, or organize it in some makeshift way like I did. So there you have it, folks. Everything from Wave 2 of Sorcerer, the second Kickstarter. Again, if you want to play solo or cooperative with 2 or 3 players, you'll want Endbringer, and for any game mode, you can use any of those new character, lineage, and domain packs, as well as the new battlefields. I hope that if you are considering anything from the second wave of Sorcerer content, this might have provided information to help you make some decisions about what you might pick up. Again, though, a fair amount of this stuff is Kickstarter exclusive. Again, Endbringer is not Kickstarter exclusive, nor are the new battlefields, but quite a few of the little packs were. But we've already delved into that. Now, as we're finishing out here, I want to give you a few caveats for backing anything from Wise Wizard Games, formerly White Wizard Games, on Kickstarter. I had these caveats at the end of the last Sorcerer video, and I feel that intellectual honesty demands that I include these caveats in any video that I do at this point for Wise Wizard Games content, because their content turns out to always be really, really solid, but there are always the same issues presented throughout the process for any Kickstarter that you back from them. So, what you need to know, first of all, is they are always late. Always very late. In this case, 3 years late. But this was the Kickstarter that supposedly convinced them to change their approach to Kickstarter and not bring things to crowdfunding until they were much closer to being ready to go to print. They have subsequently crowdfunded some other game material like Star Realms Rise of Empire or Hero Realms Dungeons, both of which are now already late as well, one of them going even later than anticipated. Obviously, it didn't really change anything, so expect that anytime you back a Kickstarter from Wise Wizard Games, it will be late. Pretty substantially late, even compared to most Kickstarters, but it will deliver, and the content will be high quality when you finally get it. Second, communication on a Kickstarter for Wise Wizard Games is always excellent during the crowdfunding process itself. It is always god-awful afterwards. Sorcerer used to go 3 months without a single update when Kickstarter's best practices is at least once a month. So after waiting for years, we were getting updates once a quarter, basically, at least for a while. I would also note there are 2 things about their process for Kickstarter that aren't necessarily particularly consumer-friendly. One is that in order to access their pledge manager, unlike most games where you could pledge $1 to get into the pledge manager for some other game, they typically require a specific tier to be backed to give you credits for the pledge manager to get access to the pledge manager, whether it's $30 or something else. In this case, it was $30 that you had to lay down just to get pledge manager access to then spend those $30, if you found enough to warrant spending all that money. They also have a refund policy of only issuing refunds up to 60 days after crowdfunding ends, which is typically before their pledge manager will open. So if part of your decision on what you'll buy comes down to things like VAT, if you're in a country that collects that, or sales taxes, or if it comes down to shipping costs and things like that, you're not going to see those before the refund window has already passed. The other big caveat is that Wise Wizard Games tends to have Kickstarter exclusive content for pretty much any of their games, and this is the greatest offender in that regard, if you consider that offensive in any way. About 47% of the character building, grimoire building options in this game, now that this second wave has delivered, that is the character, lineage, and domain packs, are Kickstarter exclusive. If you're just going to buy this stuff at retail, I would almost say pass, because about half of your character building, grimoire building, asymmetrical deck options do not exist unless you're backing them through Kickstarter or going through some secondary method like eBay later on. However, as a mitigation to that, in any of their future crowdfunding campaigns, they always make their exclusive content available for purchase in that next campaign and subsequent campaigns, even if it's not for the same game. So if you had backed Hero Realms Dungeons, you could have gotten the exclusive Kickstarter content for Sorcerer as part of your pledge. However, you're waiting until that Kickstarter delivers to then get that stuff. So it does add the waiting process in there, but it is possible to get Kickstarter exclusive items after the fact if you miss the initial Kickstarters. So my advice would be to approach these knowing those things, use those to help you make judgments if you're going to back something from Wise Wizard Games. Again, it'll always be quality content, but you're going to be waiting, and there are some things that will be particularly frustrating about the process. With Wise Wizard and Kickstarter, it's just kind of the name of the game. Your mileage will certainly vary. With that, we will wrap up this look at Sorcerer, Endbringer, and the related content from the second Kickstarter. I hope you've enjoyed the video. I hope it's been useful to you. If you enjoy Sorcerer, and yeah, have fun with Endbringer. I definitely am.